Alpha King Sergio de Leon had tested 12 packs in disguise, appearing as a broken rogue seeking help. 12 times, he was chased away, attacked, or ignored. But on a freezing winter night, a starving Omega living in a storage shed gave him her last meal, not knowing she was feeding the most powerful wolf in the territory. Esther Bartlett had nothing, no food, no warmth, no hope. Yet she still chose kindness, and that single act of compassion would expose a conspiracy of corruption, topple cruel alphas from power, and prove to a cynical king that true strength had nothing to do with rank, and everything to do with the courage to care when the world tells you not to. Chapter 1. The Starving Omega. The winter wind bit through the cracks in the shed's wooden walls like teeth seeking bone. Esther Bartlett pulled her threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. 3 days. It had been 3 days since her last meal, a piece of stale bread she'd found behind the pack kitchen, probably meant for the trash. Her stomach cramped again, a vicious twist that made her curl into herself on the dirt floor. The shed wasn't even really a shed. It was a storage space for old garden tools that the pack had grudgingly allowed her to sleep in after her father died 2 years ago. No heat, no running water, just 4 walls and a roof that leaked when it rained. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the pack house laughter, music, the clinking of silverware on plates. Tonight was the monthly feast, where the pack celebrated their prosperity under Alpha Glen Emery's leadership. Everyone would be there, everyone except her. Omegas weren't invited to feasts. Esther closed her eyes and tried to remember her father's face. Robert Bartlett had been a warrior, a beta who'd fought with honor for 20 years. He died protecting the southern border from rogues, taking down 5 enemies before a silver blade found his heart. The pack had mourned him publicly, had spoken his name with respect at his funeral, but they'd forgotten his daughter the moment the earth covered his grave. Omega blood. She'd heard Beta Wendell Blackwell say to Alpha Glen, 3 months after her father's death. The girl's mother was an Omega. Robert might have been Beta. But weak blood breeds weak wolves. Can't have her contaminating the pack house. Alpha Glen had nodded, his face expressionless. Find her somewhere else to stay. Somewhere. Appropriate. Appropriate. As if a storage shed with no insulation was appropriate for anyone, let alone the daughter of a fallen warrior. Another wave of hunger crashed through her, stronger this time. Esther's wolf whimpered inside her mind, a small, frightened sound that broke her heart. Her wolf had always been smaller than others, her transformations painful and incomplete. Another mark of her weak Omega blood. I'm sorry, Esther thought to her wolf. I'll find us something tomorrow, I promise. But tomorrow seemed very far away when you were this hungry. A knock on the shed door made Esther's eyes fly open. Her heart hammered in her chest. No one knocked on her door. No one came here at all unless it was to tell her to clean something or move somewhere else because she was in the way. Hello. A male voice called softly. Is someone in there? Esther didn't recognize the voice. It was deep, rough around the edges, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself to her feet. Her legs shook from weakness and cold. She wrapped the blanket around herself like armor and cracked open the door. A man stood in the moonlight, and Esther's first thought was that he looked like he'd been through hell. He was tall but hunched, his clothes torn and filthy, covered in mud and what might have been blood. His dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face covered in several days' worth of beard growth. One eye was swollen nearly shut, and a deep cut ran across his cheek. He clutched his ribs with one hand, as if standing upright caused him pain. A beggar. Or maybe a rogue who'd wandered onto pack territory. I'm sorry to disturb you, the man said, his voice strained. I saw your light and thought. I hoped someone might spare a bit of food. Or water. I haven't eaten in days. Esther stared at him. She didn't have a light, she couldn't afford candles, but the moon was bright tonight. And maybe he'd seen its reflection through her window that was just a hole covered with torn plastic. This is pack territory, Esther said quietly. If you're a rogue, you should leave before the patrol finds you. They'll kill you. The man nodded slowly. I know, but I'm so tired, and so hungry. I just need a little help, then I'll go. Please. There was something in his voice, a desperate sincerity that made Esther's chest tighten. She looked at his battered face, at the way he held himself like every breath hurt, and she saw herself, another creature the world had chewed up and spit out, another soul just trying to survive. "Wait here," she whispered. She left him at the door and went to the corner of her shed where she kept her supplies, a plastic crate that held everything she owned. At the bottom, wrapped in a clean cloth, was her emergency ration, half a protein bar she'd been saving for when things got truly desperate. Things were desperate now. She'd been planning to eat it tomorrow, but this man looked like he needed it more. Esther returned to the door and held out the wrapped protein bar. "It's not much," she said. "But it's all I have." The man stared at the offering in her hand. In the moonlight, Esther thought she saw something flash in his eyes, surprise, disbelief. But then his expression smoothed into gratitude. "You're giving me your food?" he asked slowly. "You said you were hungry, but this is yours, your only food, by the looks of this place." His gaze swept over her shed, taking in the dirt floor, the broken tools, the complete absence of anything that made a space livable. When his eyes returned to her face, something dark and angry flickered there. "You live here?" Esther lifted her chin, a small spark of pride igniting despite everything. "It's mine. No one can take it from me. And you're giving me your last meal. I'll be okay." The man was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took the protein bar from her hand. His fingers brushed, hers calloused, warm despite the cold, and Esther felt a strange jolt run up her arm. Static electricity, probably. "What's your name?" he asked. "Esther. Esther," he repeated, as if testing the name. "Thank you, Esther. This kindness. I won't forget it." Before she could respond, voices echoed across the pack grounds. The patrol. They must be doing their rounds between feast courses. "You need to go," Esther urged. "Now. If they find you here." "I know." The man straightened despite the obvious pain it caused him. "Thank you again, Esther. You have a good heart, better than you know." He turned and limped into the shadows, disappearing between the trees that bordered the pack territory. Esther watched until she couldn't see him anymore, then closed her door and slid down against it, her legs finally giving out. Her stomach cramped viciously, reminding her that she'd just given away her only food. But somehow, seeing that man's face when she'd handed him the protein bar, the shock, the gratitude, made the hunger a little easier to bear. At least someone had benefited from her father's warrior blood. At least someone had been helped. Esther curled back up in her blanket and closed her eyes, trying to ignore the sounds of the feast still going on in the pack house, trying to ignore the emptiness in her belly and the cold seeping into her bones. Tomorrow. She'd find something tomorrow. She had to. Dawn came too early and too cold. Esther woke to the sound of her own stomach, growling a hollow, angry sound that echoed in the empty shed. Her head pounded from hunger, and when she tried to sit up, the world spun sideways. She gripped the edge of her blanket and waited for the dizziness to pass. 4 days now. 4 days without food. Her wolf stirred weakly in her mind, barely more than a whisper of presence. Wolves needed sustenance to maintain their connection to their human halves. Go too long without food, and the wolf would retreat deep inside, leaving the human vulnerable and alone. Esther had heard stories of omegas who'd starved to death, their wolves disappearing entirely in the final hours. She wouldn't let that happen, not today. Forcing herself to stand, Esther pulled on her only other set of clothes, a pair of worn jeans, and a jacket that had belonged to her father. It swallowed her small frame, but it was warm, and it still smelled faintly like him, like pine and leather and safety. The pack house kitchen would be busy this morning, cleaning up from last night's feast. If she was lucky, there might be scraps. If she was very lucky, the kitchen Omega Patrika Denton might take pity on her and sneak her something substantial. Esther slipped out of her shed and made her way across the pack grounds, keeping to the shadows out of habit. The main territory was beautiful in the morning light, sprawling green lawns, well-maintained buildings, a training yard where warriors practiced combat. Her father had trained there once, had been respected there. Now she wasn't allowed to set foot in it. Well, look what crawled out of the garbage. Esther's heart sank. She'd been so focused on reaching the kitchen that she hadn't noticed Beta Wendell Blackwell and his second, Nicholas McCarty, standing near the pack house entrance. Both men were in their 30s, powerfully built, with the kind of casual cruelty that came from never being challenged. "Morning, Beta Wendell," Esther said quietly, dropping her gaze to the ground in the submissive posture all Omegas were required to show higher-ranking wolves. "Don't morning me, Omega," Wendell sneered, stepping into her path. "What are you doing near the pack house? You know your kind isn't welcome here." "I was just hoping to help with kitchen cleanup," Esther said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "I thought I could earn." "Earn?" Nicholas laughed, a harsh sound that made Esther flinch. "Omegas don't earn anything. You exist because we allow it. Because Alpha Glen is too soft to throw you out entirely." Wendell circled around her like a predator sizing up prey. "I heard you had a visitor last night, a strange man at your shed." Esther's blood ran cold. Someone had seen the beggar. He was just passing through. I gave him directions and sent him away. "Directions?" Wendell's hand shot out and grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "You gave a potential rogue information about our territory? Are you trying to get us all killed, you stupid girl?" "He wasn't a rogue," Esther gasped, trying to pull away. "He was just hungry, and you helped him." Wendell's face twisted with disgust. "Of course you did. Omega trash helping other trash. Your father would be ashamed." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Esther felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't cry, not in front of these men. "My father was a hero," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father was a fool who died for nothing," Nicholas said coldly. "And he left behind a useless Omega daughter who can't even shift properly. You're a stain on his memory, Esther. The kindest thing you could do is leave and never come back." Wendell shoved her backward, and Esther stumbled, catching herself before she fell. "Get out of my sight, and if I catch you near the pack house again without permission, I'll make sure Alpha Glen knows you're housing rogues. We'll see how long you keep that precious shed of yours." They walked away, laughing between themselves, leaving Esther standing alone in the cold morning air. Her arm throbbed where Wendell had grabbed her, and she knew there would be bruises, dark purple marks in the shape of his fingers. She waited until they were gone, then continued to the kitchen entrance at the back of the pack house. The door was propped open, warm air and the smell of bacon wafting out. Esther's stomach twisted so violently she had to grip the door frame. "Esther?" Patrika Denton appeared in the doorway, her kind face creased with concern. Patrika was in her 40s, an Omega like Esther, but she'd been born into the pack and had earned her place through decades of loyal service. She was one of the few people who still treated Esther like a person. "Child, you look terrible. When did you last eat?" "I'm fine," Esther lied. "I was just wondering if you needed help with—" "Come inside, now." Patrika grabbed Esther's hand and pulled her into the kitchen. The warmth hit Esther like a physical force, and she swayed on her feet. Patrika caught her and guided her to a stool in the corner. "Sit, don't move." Esther sat, too weak to argue. She watched as Patrika moved quickly around the kitchen, piling food onto a plate: eggs, bacon, toast, fruit. Real food, fresh food, the kind of food Esther hadn't tasted in months. "Here." Patrika set the plate in front of her. "Eat, slowly, or you'll make yourself sick." "I can't," Esther whispered, staring at the food like it might disappear. "If Beta Wendell finds out you fed me pack resources, let me worry about Wendell." Patrika's voice was firm. "Your father saved my son's life once, during a rogue attack. I owe the Bartlett family a debt I can never repay. The least I can do is make sure his daughter doesn't starve to death." Tears spilled down Esther's cheeks before she could stop them. "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you so much." "Eat," Patrika said gently. "And Esther? Be careful. I heard Wendell and Nicholas talking last night during the feast. They're planning something. Something about cleaning up the pack's dead weight. I don't know what it means, but—" She trailed off, her expression worried. "Just be careful." Esther nodded and picked up the fork with shaking hands. The first bite of eggs was heaven warm and buttery and so good she almost sobbed. She forced herself to eat slowly like Patrika had warned, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything on the plate. As she ate, she thought about the beggar from last night. About how he'd looked at her shed with that flash of anger in his eyes. About how he'd said, "You have a good heart. Better than you know." She wondered where he was now. If he'd made it off pack territory safely. If he'd found more help. Or if her half-protein bar had been his last meal too. She hoped he was okay. She hoped someone, somewhere, was showing him the same kindness that Patrika was showing her now. Because in a world as cruel as this one, sometimes kindness was the only thing that kept you alive. Chapter 2. When the beggar became king, Sergio de Leon, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, stood in the shadow of a massive oak tree and watched the Silvercrest pack go about their morning routines. His ribs still ached from where he deliberately had his beta rough him up yesterday, authentic injuries for an authentic disguise. The cut on his face throbbed, and the matted wig itched terribly, but discomfort was a small price to pay for truth. And the truth was exactly what he'd found last night. He pulled the half-protein bar from his pocket still wrapped in its cloth, uneaten, and studied it in the morning light. The wrapper was generic, the kind you could buy at any gas station for $1. But to the girl who'd given it to him, this had been everything. Her last meal, her emergency ration, her lifeline, and she'd handed it to a stranger without hesitation. Sergio had been testing packs across his territory for 3 months now, ever since reports started reaching the capital about alphas abusing their power, hoarding resources, neglecting the weak, violating the ancient laws that held werewolf society together. He'd visited 12 packs so far, always in disguise, always pretending to be a wounded rogue, seeking help. 11 packs had either chased him off or attacked him outright. But last night, in a storage shed with dirt floors and holes in the walls, a starving Omega had given him her last food. The memory made something hot and furious burn in Sergio's chest. That girl Esther should have been living in the pack house, surrounded by family, protected and valued. Her father had been Robert Bartlett, a warrior whose name appeared in the Northern Territory's honor rolls, a hero who died defending his pack. And they'd repaid his sacrifice by throwing his daughter into a shed like garbage. My king. Sergio turned to find his beta, Justin Burke, emerging from the tree line. Justin had been with him since childhood, and he was one of the few wolves Sergio trusted completely. Right now, Justin's face was grim. "I've completed the territory sweep," Justin said quietly. "You need to see this." They moved deeper into the forest, away from pack ears. Justin pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through photos and documents. The Silvercrest pack has 53 members. Alpha Glenn Emery has been in power for 5 years. On paper, everything looks legitimate. Taxes paid, laws followed, warriors trained. But, Sergio prompted, but when you dig deeper, the numbers don't add up. Justin pulled up a financial document. The pack receives substantial aid from the Northern Territory Fund, money specifically allocated to support lower-ranking members, elderly wolves, and Omegas. Guess where that money's actually going? He swiped to another image. It showed the interior of what appeared to be a luxury apartment, marble counters, designer furniture, expensive artwork on the walls. Alpha Glenn's private quarters, Justin said. Beta Wendell Blackwell lives in similar conditions. Meanwhile, there are 12 Omegas in this pack, and most of them are housed in converted storage spaces or basement rooms. The aid money is being embezzled. Sergio's hands clenched into fists. "Show me the Omega housing." Justin swiped through more photos. Each one made Sergio's anger burn hotter. Cramped rooms with multiple occupants, broken heating systems, mold on the walls. And then, finally, a photo of Esther's shed, barely more than 4 walls and a roof. "This is Robert Bartlett's daughter's housing," Justin said. "She gets no pack support, no food allocation, no medical care. I spoke with the kitchen Omega Patrika Denton, who confirmed that Esther survives on scraps and charity. She hasn't had a proper meal in weeks. And Alpha Glenn allows this," Sergio said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Alpha Glenn encourages it. I overheard a conversation this morning between him and Beta Wendell. They're planning to force all the Omegas out within the next month. They want to cut costs, increase profits. Wendell called it trimming the fat." Sergio looked back toward the pack territory, toward that shed, where a girl with a good heart was probably still hungry, still cold, still suffering. She'd given him everything she had, She'd shown him more honor and kindness than this entire pack had shown their own members. The ancient laws were clear. A pack that does not care for its weakest members has broken the sacred bond. An alpha who hoards while his wolves starve has forsaken his right to lead. How long until the contingent arrives? Sergio asked. They're en route now. Should be here by midday. Justin studied his king's face. What are you thinking? Sergio pulled out the protein bar again, turning it over in his hands. I'm thinking that last night, a starving Omega taught me more about true leadership than most alphas could learn in a lifetime. I'm thinking that her father's sacrifice deserves to be honored, not spat upon. And I'm thinking, he looked at Justin, and his eyes flashed gold, the eyes of a king prepared to dispense justice. I'm thinking it's time Alpha Glen Emery learned what it means to face the consequences of his choices. Meanwhile, back at the pack house, Esther finished her breakfast and helped Patrika with the morning dishes, grateful for the work that kept her hands busy and her mind off the confrontation with Wendell. But as she dried the last plate, the kitchen door burst open. Beta Wendell strode in, his face flushed with anger. Behind him, Nicholas and 2 other high-ranking wolves formed an intimidating wall of muscle. There you are, Wendell snarled, pointing at Esther. Alpha Glen wants to see you. Now. Esther's heart plummeted into her stomach. Why? I haven't done anything. That rogue you helped last night? He was spotted again this morning on the eastern border. The patrol nearly caught him. Wendell grabbed her arm, the same arm he'd bruised earlier, and yanked her toward him. You're going to tell Alpha Glen everything you know about him. Or so help me, I'll make sure you regret it. Patrika stepped forward. Beta Wendell, please. She's just a girl. Stay out of this, Patrika. Unless you want to join her in the Alpha's office. Wendell's threat was clear. Even Patrika's years of service wouldn't protect her if she interfered. Esther met Patrika's eyes and shook her head slightly. Don't risk yourself for me. Patrika's face crumpled with helpless anguish, but she stepped back. Let's go. Wendell growled, dragging Esther out of the kitchen. They hauled her through the pack house, through corridors she'd never been allowed to walk, past rooms filled with comfort and warmth she'd never experienced. Other pack members stopped to stare, their expressions ranging from curious to contemptuous. No one moved to help. They reached a set of double doors at the end of the main hallway. Wendell knocked once, then pushed the doors open without waiting for a response. Alpha Glen Emery's office was exactly what Esther expected. Opulent, excessive, designed to intimidate. The Alpha himself sat behind a massive desk made of dark wood, his gray-streaked hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit crisp and clean. He was in his 50s, handsome in a cold way, with eyes that looked at Esther like she was something stuck to his shoe. Sir, Wendell said, shoving Esther forward. She stumbled and barely caught herself. The Omega, as requested. Esther Bartlett. Glen's voice was smooth, cultured, completely devoid of warmth. I understand you had an encounter with a stranger last night. A male wolf, injured, asking for help. He was just passing through, Esther said, fighting to keep her voice steady. He asked for food. I gave him some and sent him away. You gave him food. Glen leaned back in his chair, studying her. Food that I'm told you don't have. Food that you should have been saving for yourself. It was mine to give. Nothing is yours, Glen said flatly. Everything you have, everything you are, exists, because I allow it. The shed you sleep in? Mine. The air you breathe on this territory? Mine. That food you gave away? It came from pack resources, which means it was mine. You stole from me and gave pack property to a potential threat. I didn't steal anything. Patrika gave me. Patrika will be dealt with separately. Glen waved his hand dismissively. Right now, I want information about this stranger. Description, accent, any identifying marks, everything. Esther's mind raced. If she told them about the beggar, if they found him, she didn't know why. But she felt a bone-deep certainty that the man from last night didn't deserve to be hunted. He'd been hurt and hungry and desperate. Like her. I don't know anything, she said. It was dark. He stayed for maybe 2 minutes. I couldn't see his face clearly. Glen's eyes narrowed. You're lying. I'm not. His fist slammed down on the desk, making Esther jump. Don't lie. 2. Me. A rogue on my territory is a threat to every wolf in this pack. If you're protecting him, You're committing treason against your own people. He's not a rogue." The words burst out of Esther before she could stop them. He was just a traveler. Someone who needed help. Someone who what? Glenn stood, rounding the desk with predatory grace. Someone who matters more to you than your pack? Than your alpha? He was in front of her now, looming over her, using his size and power to intimidate. Esther forced herself not to back away, not to show weakness, even though her knees were shaking. "I gave him food because it was the right thing to do," she said quietly. "Because that's what wolves are supposed to do. Help each other. Protect the vulnerable. My father taught me that." "Your father was a fool," Glenn said coldly. "And he raised a fool for a daughter." "Wendell?" "Yes, sir. Double the Omega's work assignments. No food from pack resources for the next week. If she wants to give away meals, she can learn to live without them." Glenn returned to his desk, already dismissing her. "And increase patrols on all borders. I want that rogue found and eliminated. Understood?" "Understood, sir." Esther's world tilted. No food for a week. She'd barely survived 4 days. A week would. She wouldn't survive a week. Wendell grabbed her arm again, dragging her toward the door. "You heard the alpha. Maybe next time you'll think twice about helping trash like yourself." They threw her out of the office. Esther caught herself against the wall, her vision swimming with tears she refused to shed. Not here. Not where they could see. She walked through the pack house on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Past the staring faces. Past the whispered comments. Out the door and across the grounds to her shed. Only when she was inside, with the door closed and locked, did she let herself collapse. No food for a week. She was going to die. And no one in this pack would even care. Chapter 3. Justice comes to Silvercrest. The king's contingent arrived at noon. Esther was in her shed, trying to conserve energy by staying as still as possible, when she heard the commotion. Vehicles, many of them, the rumble of engines followed by the organized sound of boots on pavement. Then voices sharp, commanding, official. She dragged herself to the small window and peered out, her breath caught in her throat. At least 30 wolves in formal black uniforms were spreading across the pack grounds, their movements precise and military. Each one wore the silver insignia of the Northern Territory Royal Guard, the king's personal forces. At the center of the formation, a sleek black SUV idled, its windows tinted dark. "What's happening?" Esther whispered to herself. The pack was gathering in the main courtyard, summoned by some silent alarm. She could see Alpha Glenn striding out of the pack house, Wendell and Nicholas flanking him. Glenn's face was confused at first, then irritated as he took in the armed guards surrounding his territory. One of the royal guards, a tall man with broad shoulders and an air of absolute authority, stepped forward. His voice carried across the grounds, and even from her shed, Esther could hear every word. "Alpha Glenn Emery of the Silvercrest Pack. By order of Alpha King Sergio de Leon, you and your council are hereby summoned to answer charges of embezzlement, neglect, and violation of the sacred pack laws. You will submit to immediate investigation." Glenn's face went white, then red with fury. "This is outrageous. On what grounds?" "On grounds that your pack is under suspicion of misappropriating Northern Territory aid funds, failing to provide for lower-ranking pack members, and creating conditions that violate the basic rights guaranteed to all wolves under the king's law." The guard's expression was carved from stone. "You will comply, or you will be detained by force." "I demand to speak with the king directly," Glenn snarled. "I have rights. This pack has rights. Your rights are being respected, Alpha Glenn, which is more than can be said for how you've treated your own wolves." The voice came from behind the guards, and it made Esther's heart stop. She knew that voice. The royal guards parted, and a man stepped through their ranks. He was tall, powerfully built, with dark hair and strong features. He wore the formal black and silver of the king's guard, and when he moved, every wolf in the courtyard instinctively lowered their gaze in submission. But Esther's eyes were locked on his face. The face she'd seen last night, battered and bruised beneath a disguise. The face of the beggar who'd stood at her door and accepted her last meal with gratitude in his eyes. No, it couldn't be. But as he walked closer to Alpha Glenn, she saw it clearly: the same strong jaw, the same bearing, the same voice. The injuries were gone now. the filthy clothes replaced with royal attire. But the eyes were identical, dark brown, intense, and currently fixed on Alpha Glenn with an expression that could freeze fire. Alpha King Sergio de Leon, the guard beside him announced formally. Ruler of the Northern Territories, keeper of the sacred laws, protector of pack sovereignty. The beggar was the king. The man she'd given her last meal to was the Alpha King. Esther's legs gave out, and she slid down the wall, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. He'd tested her. Last night he'd been testing her, and she hadn't known. She'd just seen someone hungry and hurt. And she'd— Alpha Glenn, King Sergio said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. 3 months ago, I received reports of systemic abuse within my territory. Packs hoarding resources while their members starved. Alphas embezzling aid money meant for the vulnerable. I didn't want to believe it, so I decided to see for myself. He gestured to the royal guard. Over the past 12 weeks, I've visited 13 packs in disguise, appearing as a wounded rogue seeking help. A simple test of basic wolf decency. Do you know how many packs offered assistance? Glenn's jaw clenched. He said nothing. 1. Sergio continued, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Out of 13 packs, only 1 wolf showed me kindness. Only 1 wolf gave me food when I was starving, shelter when I was cold, compassion when I was desperate. And do you know where I found that wolf, Alpha Glenn? Sergio turned, and his gaze swept across the pack grounds. Esther saw his eyes find her shed, saw them lock onto the window where she was hiding. Even from this distance, the intensity of his stare made her breath catch. I found her in a storage shed, Sergio said, turning back to Glenn. Living in conditions that wouldn't be acceptable for equipment, let alone a wolf. The daughter of Robert Bartlett, a warrior who died defending this pack, forced to survive on scraps while you live in luxury paid for with embezzled aid money. That's a lie. Glenn's composure cracked. I've done nothing illegal. Everything in this pack is documented. Justin, Sergio said calmly. The tall guard Justin pulled out a tablet and began reading. Northern Territory Aid Fund, allocated to Silvercrest Pack, $200,000 annually for Omega support, elderly care, and infrastructure maintenance. Actual spending on these categories over the past 5 years. Approximately $12,000 total. The remainder has been funneled into private accounts belonging to Alpha Glenn Emery, Beta Wendell Blackwell, and 3 other high-ranking pack members. He looked up from the tablet, his expression disgusted. You've stolen over $900,000 from wolves who were starving. The pack erupted. Gasps, shouts, angry voices rising from wolves who were only now learning the truth. Esther saw Patricia in the crowd, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She saw other Omega's wolves she'd lived alongside in poverty beginning to understand why they'd suffered while their alpha thrived. This is a setup. Wendell burst out, stepping in front of Glenn. The king has no authority to. I have every authority. Sergio cut him off, his voice like thunder. The sacred laws give me the right to investigate any pack suspected of violating the fundamental tenets of wolf society. And make no mistake, Beta Wendell, you and your alpha have violated every single one. He turned to address the entire pack now, his voice rising so everyone could hear. The first law states, a pack protects its weakest members. You have failed. The second law states, an alpha serves his wolves before himself. You have failed. The third law states, resources are shared according to need, not rank. You have failed. Sergio's eyes flashed gold, the eyes of an Alpha King passing judgment. As of this moment, Alpha Glenn Emery, you are stripped of your title and authority. Beta Wendell Blackwell, Nicholas McCarty, you are removed from your positions. All 3 of you will be detained pending formal trial for embezzlement, neglect, and conspiracy to commit fraud against the crown. No. Glenn lunged forward, his wolf surging beneath his skin. You can't do this. This is my pack, my territory. Royal guards moved instantly, forming a barrier. Glenn crashed into them and was restrained, his arms yanked behind his back. He struggled, snarling and snapping, but more guards piled on until he was subdued. Wendell and Nicholas tried to run and were tackled within seconds. The rest of the pack stood frozen, watching their leadership fall apart. Sergio let the silence stretch, Let the weight of what was happening sink into every wolf present. Then he spoke again, his voice softer but no less commanding. For the next 30 days, this pack will be under direct supervision of the Royal Guard while we conduct a full audit and investigation. Every member of this pack will be interviewed, every financial record will be examined, and every wolf who was harmed by this corruption. His gaze found Esther's window again, and this time she couldn't look away. Will receive the justice they deserve. 2 hours later, Esther was still in her shed, still processing, when a knock came at her door. Not the harsh pounding of Wendell, or the demanding rap of pack authority. A polite, gentle knock. "Esther?" It was Patrica's voice, thick with emotion. "Honey, can I come in?" Esther opened the door. Patrica stood there with 2 royal guards behind her, not threatening, just present. The older woman's face was tear-stained but also lit with something Esther hadn't seen in years. "Hope, the king wants to speak with you," Patrica said softly. "He's asked for you specifically. I know you must be terrified. But Esther, I think this might be a good thing. I think he's going to help you." Esther's mouth was dry. "The king wants to see me? He's in the pack house, using Glenn's old office. The guards will escort you." Patrica reached out and squeezed Esther's hand. "It's going to be okay, I promise. Everything's going to be okay now." The guards led Esther across the pack grounds. This time, when pack members stared, it wasn't with contempt. It was with curiosity, with concern. Some even looked guilty, as if they were only now realizing how badly she'd been treated while they'd looked the other way. They brought her to the Alpha's office, Glenn's office, except Glenn was gone now, probably locked in a cell somewhere. The double doors were open, and inside, King Sergio stood by the window, looking out over the territory. He'd removed the formal jacket, and in just the black shirt and pants, he looked more human. More like the man who'd stood at her shed door last night. "Your Majesty," one of the guards said. "Esther Bartlett, as requested." Sergio turned, and when his eyes met Esther's, she saw that same flash of recognition from the night before. That same intensity. "Thank you," he said to the guards. "Please wait outside," and closed the doors. The guards obeyed, leaving Esther alone with the king. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Esther's mind was screaming at her to bow, to show submission, to do something appropriate for meeting royalty, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She just stood there, staring at the man she'd fed her last meal to. "I'm sorry I deceived you," Sergio said finally. His voice was gentler now, without the commanding edge from earlier. "Last night, when I came to your door, I needed to see the truth of this pack. I needed to know who they really were. And you found out," Esther whispered. "I did." He took a step closer. "But I also found something I wasn't looking for. I found a wolf with more honor and kindness than most of the alphas I've met in my life. A wolf who gave everything she had to a stranger because it was the right thing to do." He pulled something from his pocket, the protein bar, still wrapped in its cloth. "I didn't eat this," Sergio said. "I couldn't, because accepting it would have meant taking your last hope. And I'd already seen enough of how this pack had stolen from you. So I kept it. As a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Esther asked, her voice barely audible. Sergio's expression was intense, almost fierce. "Of what a true wolf looks like. Of what real strength is. You were starving, Esther. 4 days without food. Living in a shed with no heat. Treated like garbage by wolves who should have protected you. And still, when someone asked for help, you gave it. No hesitation. No conditions. Just kindness." He held out the protein bar to her. "This belongs to you." Esther took it with shaking hands. The wrapper crinkled, familiar and strange at the same time. She'd thought she'd never see it again. Thought it was gone forever, like so many other things. "Thank you," she whispered, for everything, for stopping them, for making them answer for what they did." "Don't thank me yet," Sergio said. "We have a long investigation ahead. There will be trials, testimony, evidence gathering, and I need you to be part of it. I need you to tell your story, all of it. Everything they did to you, everything you suffered. It won't be easy." "I'll do it," Esther said immediately. "If it means other wolves won't suffer like this, I'll do it. Sergio studied her for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. Something warm and approving and maybe, just maybe, a little bit odd. You're remarkable, he said softly. I hope you know that. Before Esther could respond, before she could process the way his words made her heart skip, Justin appeared in the doorway. My king, he said urgently. We have a situation. Some of Glenn's supporters are gathering near the eastern border. They're talking about resistance, about not accepting your authority. Sergio's expression hardened instantly, the gentle warmth replaced by cold authority. How many? 15, maybe 20. Beta-level wolves, mostly. They're armed. Mobilize the guard. I want them surrounded but not engaged. I'll handle this personally. Sergio turned back to Esther. I'm sorry. We'll continue this conversation later. In the meantime, Justin will arrange better accommodations for you. Somewhere warm, somewhere safe. I don't need. Yes, you do. His tone left no room for argument. And Esther? What you did last night. It mattered. More than you know. I won't forget it. He left, Justin following close behind, leaving Esther alone in the office, with her protein bar and a heart that wouldn't stop racing. The beggar had been a king, and somehow, impossibly, that king seemed to think she was worth protecting. Chapter 4. Blood, Silver, and Transformation. The eastern border was chaos. Esther watched from the packhouse window as royal guards formed a defensive perimeter around a group of wolves who'd barricaded themselves near the old training facility. She could see Sergio at the front of the guard formation, his posture radiating authority and controlled power. Even from this distance, his presence was magnetic. They're idiots, Patrika muttered beside her. She'd refused to leave Esther alone, had stayed close like a protective mother hen. Glenn's supporters. They think they can fight the king's guard? They'll be slaughtered. Why are they doing this? Esther asked, unable to look away from the scene unfolding below. Because Glenn promised them things. Power, money, status. Some wolves would rather die than lose their place in the hierarchy. Patrika shook her head sadly. And some of them probably did terrible things under Glenn's orders. They're scared of what will come out during the investigation. Down below, Sergio raised his hand. The guards stopped advancing, creating a tense standoff. His voice carried up to the window, amplified by the natural acoustics of the valley. This is your final warning, Sergio called out. Surrender peacefully, and you'll be treated fairly. Resist, and you'll be charged with treason against the crown. You have 60 seconds to decide. A wolf stepped forward from the barricaded group. Thomas Friedman, one of Glenn's enforcers. Esther recognized him. He'd been one of the wolves who'd laughed when Wendell shoved her that morning. His face was twisted with rage and desperation. We don't recognize your authority here, King, Thomas shouted. Glenn Emery is our alpha. You have no right to arrest him, no right to dismantle our pack structure. Glenn Emery violated the sacred laws, Sergio replied, his voice hard as iron. He stole from his own wolves. He let them starve while he lived in luxury. He betrayed everything it means to be an alpha. He made this pack strong. He made us prosperous. He made himself prosperous, Sergio corrected. On the backs of wolves who had nothing. On the suffering of omegas who went hungry so he could buy designer furniture. Is that the kind of alpha you want to die for, Thomas? A flicker of uncertainty crossed Thomas's face. Behind him, some of the other rebels were whispering among themselves, their resolve clearly wavering. We had order, Thomas insisted, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. We had structure. What will we have now? Chaos? Weakness? Omegas thinking they're equal to betas? You'll have justice, Sergio said. You'll have a pack that actually follows the laws our ancestors died to establish. And yes, Thomas, you'll have omegas, who are treated like the valuable pack members they are. Because that's what the sacred laws demand. I won't. Thomas never finished his sentence. One of the wolves behind him, a younger beta named Zach Lord, suddenly grabbed Thomas's arm and yanked him backward. Enough, Zach said loudly, addressing both Thomas and the king. We surrender. This is insane. I'm not dying for Glenn's crimes. Traitor, Thomas snarled. trying to shake him off. But other wolves were stepping forward now, moving away from the barricade with their hands raised in surrender. One by one, Glenn's supporters realized the futility of their resistance. Within minutes, only 5 wolves remained defiant Thomas, and 4 others who looked more terrified than loyal. Sergio nodded to Justin, who led a squad forward to accept the surrender. The rebels were disarmed and detained with efficient precision. Thomas struggled and cursed, but he was subdued quickly. "Take them to holding," Sergio ordered. "Separate cells. I want them interviewed individually, find out who was following orders and who was actively participating in the abuse." "Yes, my king." As the guards led the prisoners away, Sergio turned and looked directly up at the packhouse window, at Esther. Even from this distance, the intensity of his gaze made her heart hammer in her chest. He raised his hand slightly, a small gesture of acknowledgement, then turned back to his duties. "That man," Patrika said softly, "is going to change everything." Esther couldn't respond. Her throat was too tight with emotions she didn't know how to name. That evening, Esther had been moved to a guest room in the packhouse, a real room with a real bed, heating, and a bathroom. The contrast to her shed was so stark it felt surreal. She'd spent 20 minutes just standing under the hot shower, letting the water wash away days of grime and cold. Now she sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a soft robe that someone had left for her, staring at the protein bar on the nightstand. She still hadn't eaten it, couldn't bring herself to. Somehow, it felt like more than food now. It felt like proof that kindness existed, that someone had seen her and valued her, even when she'd had nothing to offer. A knock at the door made her jump. "Esther? It's me, Patrika. Can I come in?" "Yes, of course." Patrika entered, carrying a tray laden with food, real food, hot food, enough to feed 3 people. "Dinner," she said with a warm smile. "And before you argue, the king specifically ordered that you be well fed." His exact words were, "Make sure she eats until she's satisfied, and then make sure there's food available whenever she wants it." Esther's eyes stung with tears. "He said that?" "He did. And honey." Patrika set the tray down and sat beside Esther on the bed. "I've been in this pack for 30 years. I've seen a lot of alphas, a lot of leaders. I've never seen anyone look at someone the way the king looked at you today." "What do you mean?" "Like you matter. Like you're important. Not because of your rank or your bloodline, but because of who you are." Patrika squeezed her hand. "Eat your dinner. Rest. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. The king wants to start formal interviews, and yours will be first." After Patrika left, Esther forced herself to eat. The food was delicious: roasted chicken, vegetables, fresh bread, fruit. Each bite felt like a small miracle. Her wolf stirred in her mind, stronger now, grateful for the sustenance. "We're going to be okay," Esther thought to her wolf. "Things are changing." Her wolf didn't respond with words. Wolves rarely did, but Esther felt a surge of warmth and agreement. Yes, things were changing. She was finishing her meal when another knock came. This one was different, more formal, accompanied by a voice she recognized. "Miss Bartlett? It's Justin Burke, the king's beta. May I enter?" Esther's stomach flipped nervously. "Yes, come in." Justin entered, and up close he was even more intimidating than from a distance. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that came from years of military training, but his expression was kind as he nodded to her. "I apologize for disturbing you so late," he said, "but the king asked me to check on you personally. He wanted to make sure you have everything you need." "I do," Esther said quickly. "This room is. It's more than I ever expected. Thank you. It's the bare minimum of what you deserve." Justin's voice was firm. "And I want you to know that what happened to you, what this pack allowed to happen, will not go unpunished. Every wolf who turned a blind eye to your suffering will answer for it." The conviction in his voice made Esther believe him. "What will happen to Alpha Glen? To Wendell and the others? They'll face trial within the month. The evidence against them is overwhelming. They'll likely spend years in a royal detention facility, and they'll never hold pack authority again." Justin's expression darkened. "But there are others involved too. Wolves who knew what was happening and did nothing. Wolves who actively participated in the cruelty. We need to identify all of them. That's why the king wants to interview me tomorrow." "Yes. And I need to warn you. Esther, it won't be easy. You'll have to relive painful memories. You'll have to speak about things you've probably tried to forget. But your testimony is crucial. You're the clearest example of how badly this pack failed its members. Esther nodded slowly. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. Justin studied her for a moment, something like respect flickering in his eyes. The king told me what you did for him last night. That you gave him your last meal without knowing who he was. That takes extraordinary character. I just saw someone who needed help. Exactly. Justin's voice softened slightly. That's what makes it extraordinary. Most wolves only help those who can help them in return. You helped someone with nothing to offer. That's true strength, Esther. Don't ever forget that. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. The king wanted me to tell you that your father would be proud of you. Robert Bartlett was a good wolf, and he raised a daughter who honors his memory every day. The words hit Esther like a physical blow. She'd spent 2 years believing she'd dishonored her father's legacy, that her weakness and Omega blood had tarnished everything he'd stood for. To hear that the king that anyone thought differently. Thank you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Thank you so much. After Justin left, Esther curled up in the soft bed and cried. But for the first time in years, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief, of hope, of feeling seen and valued after so long in the shadows. She fell asleep thinking about tomorrow, about facing her past, about the king who'd disguised himself as a beggar and found her worthy of protection. The next morning, Esther woke to sunlight streaming through real windows with real curtains. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned the arrests, the king's revelation, the guest room, the promise of justice. She dressed in clothes that had been left for her, simple but clean and new, fitting properly instead of hanging off her frame like her old things. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Still thin, still marked by hardship, but there was something different in her eyes. Something that hadn't been there before. Hope. A guard escorted her to a conference room in the pack house where the interviews were being conducted. Inside, she found Justin setting up recording equipment, while Sergio stood by the window, reading through documents. He looked up when she entered, and his expression softened. Esther, thank you for coming. He gestured to a comfortable chair at the table. Please, sit. Would you like coffee? Water? Anything? Water would be good, Esther said, her voice steadier than she felt. Justin poured her a glass while Sergio took the seat across from her. This close, without the beggar disguise, he was almost overwhelming. Handsome in a rugged way, with eyes that seemed to see everything, and that aura of power that made her wolf whimper with recognition of his dominance. But there was kindness there too, genuine concern in the way he looked at her. Before we begin, Sergio said gently, I want you to understand that you're not on trial here. You're not being accused of anything. This interview is about documenting what happened to you so we can build a case against those who harmed you. If at any point you need to stop, just say so. Understood? Esther nodded. Understood. Good. Sergio glanced at Justin, who started the recording equipment. Let's start with your father. Tell me about Robert Bartlett. And so Esther talked. She told them about her father, his strength, his honor, his unwavering belief in pack loyalty. She told them about the day he died, about the funeral where everyone had promised to take care of his daughter. She told them about how those promises had evaporated within weeks. She told them about being moved to the shed, about the hunger, about the cold, about Beta Wendell's cruelty, and Alpha Glenn's indifference, about the pack members who'd turned away when she'd asked for help, who'd pretended not to see her suffering. Sergio's expression grew darker with every word, his hands clenching into fists on the table. Justin's face was carved from stone, but Esther could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the barely controlled anger. And the night I came to your door, Sergio said quietly. You'd been without food for 4 days? Yes, but you still gave me your last meal. You needed it more than I did, Esther said simply. Or I thought you did. I didn't know you were. She trailed off, not sure how to finish. Testing you? Sergio's voice was rough. That's what it was, Esther. A test. And you passed it in a way that broke my heart and restored my faith in wolves at the same time. Do you understand what that means? Esther shook her head mutely. Sergio leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. It means that in your darkest moment, when you had every reason to be selfish and bitter and cruel, you chose kindness. You chose compassion. You proved that honor isn't about rank or power, it's about character. And yours is extraordinary. The words settled into Esther's chest like warm honey, healing places she hadn't known were wounded. What happens now? She asked softly. Now, we finish this investigation. We document every crime, every failure, every moment of cruelty, and then we make sure it never happens again. Sergio's expression was fierce. This pack will be rebuilt from the ground up, with new leadership, new policies, and an absolute guarantee that no wolf will ever suffer the way you did. And me? Esther's voice was barely a whisper. What happens to me? Sergio was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. That depends on what you want, Esther. You could stay here once the pack is stabilized. Or you could request a transfer to another pack. Or, his expression shifted into something Esther couldn't quite read. Something intense and possessive and maybe a little bit dangerous. Or you could come with me to the capital, as a member of the royal household, under my personal protection. The room went completely silent. Justin's eyebrows shot up, though he said nothing. Esther's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Why would you do that? She breathed. Because you deserve better than this place, Sergio said simply. Because I owe you a debt I can never fully repay, and because, he hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across his face. Because when I look at you, I see everything a wolf should be, and I want that near me. I want to protect it, to honor it. His voice dropped lower. If you'll let me. Before Esther could respond, before she could process the enormity of what he was offering, an alarm shrieked through the pack house. Justin was on his feet instantly, his hand on his weapon. Security breach, eastern perimeter. Sergio stood, his expression shifting from vulnerable to deadly in a heartbeat. Details. Unknown hostiles. Multiple contacts. They're moving fast. Justin was already heading for the door. We need to evacuate. The window exploded inward. Glass shattered everywhere as a massive gray wolf crashed through, landing in the center of the room with a snarl that shook the walls. Esther screamed and threw herself backward as the wolf's yellow eyes locked onto her. It wasn't one of Glenn's wolves. The scent was wrong, rogue, definitely rogue, but organized, deliberate. The wolf lunged at Esther, claws extended, jaws wide. It never reached her. Sergio moved with impossible speed, intercepting the attack. His body collided with the rogue mid-leap, and both of them crashed into the far wall hard enough to crack the plaster. The rogue snapped at Sergio's throat, but the king twisted, using the wolf's momentum against it. With a brutal efficiency that spoke of decades of combat experience, Sergio slammed the rogue into the ground and pinned it with one hand around its throat. Shift, Sergio commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha king. Now, the rogue had no choice. The command wasn't a request, it was a compulsion that overrode free will. The wolf's body convulsed, bones cracking and reshaping until a naked man lay gasping on the broken glass. Young, maybe mid-20s, with the lean build of someone who'd lived rough for years. Who sent you? Sergio demanded, not loosening his grip. The rogue laughed a broken, slightly mad sound. You think you've won? You think arresting Glenn changes anything? There are others, King, packs all across your territory doing the same thing, and they don't like you poking around. Answer the question. They're coming for her. The rogue's eyes found Esther, and they were full of malicious glee. The Omega who betrayed her Alpha, the witness who'll destroy the old ways. They're coming. And they'll make sure she never testifies. More glass shattered. More wolves poured through the window and the door simultaneously. Royal guards met them, and suddenly the conference room was a battlefield. Fur and blood and snarls filled the air. Justin shifted into his wolf form, massive and black and terrifying, and tore into a rogue with savage precision. Sergio released the pinned rogue and turned to Esther. Get behind me, now. But there were too many. A brown wolf broke through the defensive line, racing straight for Esther with murder in its eyes. She had nowhere to go, no way to defend herself. Her own wolf was too weak, too untrained. The brown wolf leaped, and Esther felt something inside her crack open. Later, she wouldn't remember the details, wouldn't remember the pain of shifting, or the moment her wolf finally, fully emerged. All she would remember was the desperate need to survive, to fight back, to prove she wasn't helpless. Her wolf met the rogue midair. She was smaller than the attacker. She'd always been smaller, but desperation gave her strength. Her jaws found the rogue's throat, and she bit down hard, tasting blood and victory, and the primal satisfaction of defending herself for the first time in her life. The rogue yelped and thrashed, but Esther didn't let go. She held on with everything she had until the rogue went limp. When she finally released it and stood over its unconscious body, breathing hard, she realized the room had gone silent. Everyone was staring at her. The royal guards, the surviving rogues being restrained, Justin in his massive black wolf form, and Sergio, who looked at her with an expression of absolute awe. "Esther," he breathed. "Your wolf." She looked down at herself, at paws that were white as snow, at fur that gleamed silver in the sunlight streaming through the broken window. Her father's coloring, her father's strength, hidden all these years because she'd been too starved and broken for it to emerge. But now she could feel it. Feel the power thrumming through her veins, the connection to her wolf finally complete. She'd defended herself. She'd fought back. She'd survived, and she would never be weak again. Chapter 5. The Old Guard Strikes. The aftermath of the attack was organized chaos. Royal guards secured the perimeter while medics treated the wounded. 3 rogues lay dead. 5 more were restrained and being loaded into transport vehicles, and the conference room looked like a war zone. Broken glass glittered on every surface, blood stained the carpet, and the wall where Sergio had slammed the first rogue had a crater the size of a dinner plate. Esther stood in the center of it all, still in her wolf form, trembling with adrenaline and shock. She'd shifted back once, tried to, but her wolf had refused, too keyed up from the fight to retreat. It was the first time she'd ever had a complete, stable shift. The first time her wolf had been strong enough to maintain the transformation. "We protected us," her wolf said in her mind, the voice clearer than it had ever been. "We're not weak anymore." No, they weren't weak anymore. "Esther?" Sergio's voice was gentle as he approached, still in his human form despite the violence that had just occurred. His shirt was torn and bloodied, but he seemed uninjured. "Can you shift back? Or do you need more time?" She tried again, focusing on her human form. This time, her wolf cooperated. The shift hurt less than it ever had before, still painful, but manageable. Within seconds, she was standing naked and shaking on the broken glass. Someone immediately wrapped a blanket around her. Patricia, who'd appeared from somewhere with tears streaming down her face. "You shifted," Patricia sobbed, pulling Esther into a fierce hug. "You beautiful, brave girl. You finally shifted properly. Your father would be so proud." Esther clung to her, suddenly aware of how close she'd come to dying. If her wolf hadn't emerged, if she hadn't found that hidden strength. "You're bleeding," Sergio said, his voice sharp with concern. He was beside her in an instant, examining her arms and legs. "Glass cuts, nothing deep, but they need to be cleaned and bandaged." "Medic." A female wolf in Royal Guard uniform hurried over with a medical kit. "Sir, I should take her to the infirmary." "Do it here," Sergio commanded. "I'm not letting her out of my sight until we know the situation is secure." The medic nodded and began cleaning Esther's cuts with efficient gentleness. Esther watched Sergio as she was treated, saw the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, the muscle jumping in his jaw. He looked furious and protective in equal measure. "My king." Justin approached, back in human form and wearing spare clothes someone had provided. His expression was grim. "We've interrogated the surviving rogues. You need to hear this. Go ahead. They were hired. Someone paid them to attack during the investigation, specifically to target Miss Bartlett." Justin's eyes flicked to Esther, then back to Sergio. "The orders came through intermediaries, but the rogues were told she was a traitor who needed to be eliminated before she could testify." Sergio's eyes flashed gold. "Who hired them?" "They don't know names. The communication was done through encrypted channels, payments made in untraceable cryptocurrency." "But..." Justin hesitated. "One of them mentioned an organization. called themselves the Old Guard, said they were protecting traditional pack values from royal interference. The Old Guard. Sergio's voice was deadly quiet. They're organizing. It appears so. These weren't random rogues, my king. They were trained, equipped, coordinated. This was a professional hit. Esther's blood ran cold. Someone had sent trained killers after her because she'd agreed to testify, because she'd told the truth about what Glenn had done. How many packs are involved? Sergio asked. Unknown. But if they could mobilize 8 rogues this quickly, Justin's expression was troubled. We're looking at a network. Multiple alphas working together to resist reform. Glenn's arrest might have been the catalyst, but this goes deeper. Sergio was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through implications and strategies. Then he turned to Esther, and his expression softened slightly. I'm moving you to the capital. Tonight. You're not safe here, and I won't risk your life for this investigation, but the testimony, Esther started, can be done remotely if necessary. Your safety is more important than courtroom dramatics. His tone left no room for argument. Justin. Arrange transport. Full security detail. I want her in the royal compound before dawn. Wait, Esther said, finding her voice despite the fear. If I run, if I hide, then they win. They'll know they can silence witnesses with violence. They'll know the king can be intimidated. Sergio's expression was incredulous. Esther. They tried to kill you. They'll try again. Then let them try. The words came out stronger than Esther felt, but she meant them. I'm not running anymore. I've spent 2 years hiding in a shed, making myself small, pretending I didn't matter. But I do matter. My testimony matters. And if I disappear now, every other wolf who suffered under corrupt alphas will think there's no point in speaking up. She's right, Justin said quietly. If we pull her from the investigation, it sends a message that we can't protect our witnesses. It undermines everything we're trying to accomplish. Sergio turned on him, fury blazing in his eyes. Are you seriously suggesting I use her as bait? I'm suggesting we give her a choice. Justin's voice was steady. And that we respect whatever choice she makes. Sergio's gaze swung back to Esther. You don't know what you're asking. These wolves are ruthless. They'll come for you again, and next time they'll be better prepared. Then prepare better defenses, Esther said, lifting her chin. I'm not afraid anymore. Or, I am afraid. Terrified, actually. But I'm also angry. And I'm done letting fear control my life. For a long moment, Sergio just stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to respect. Then to something darker and more intense. You're remarkable, he said softly, echoing his words from yesterday. Absolutely remarkable. He turned to Justin. Triple the security detail. I want guards on her 24/7. Motion sensors, cameras, the works. If a mouse tries to get near her, I want to know about it. And Justin? Yes. My king? If anything happens to her, if anyone gets within striking distance, you're to get her out immediately. Consequences be damned. Understood? Understood. Sergio looked back at Esther, and his expression was raw, with an emotion she couldn't quite name. You're braver than you know. But bravery won't stop a silver bullet. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Esther whispered. 3 hours later, Esther was moved to a more secure room on the 3rd floor of the pack house. One with reinforced doors, bulletproof windows, and 2 guards stationed outside at all times. The medic had finished treating her cuts, and Patricia had brought her food, clothes, and reassurance that the pack was rallying behind her. Everyone's talking about how you fought off that rogue, Patricia said, her eyes shining with pride. The Omegas especially. You showed them that we're not helpless, that we can defend ourselves if we have to. I got lucky, Esther said, though part of her knew it was more than luck. Her wolf had been strong, fast, capable. Everything she'd been told an Omega wolf couldn't be. That wasn't luck, honey. That was strength you've always had but never got the chance to use. Patricia squeezed her hand. Your father's warrior blood runs true. Don't ever doubt that again. After Patricia left, Esther sat by the window and watched the sun set over the packed territory. Down below, royal guards patrolled in organized formations, and she could see Justin coordinating the security measures. Everything looked calm, controlled, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was still coming. A knock at the door made her tense. "It's me," Sergio's voice called. "May I come in?" "Yes." He entered carrying a tray with dinner soup, bread, fruit. "I thought you might be hungry, and I wanted to check on you. Make sure you're really okay." "I'm fine," Esther said automatically, then stopped herself. "No, actually, I'm not fine. I'm scared and confused and I keep replaying the attack in my head, but I'm alive, and that's more than I expected this morning." Sergio set the tray down and took the chair across from her. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For putting you in danger. For underestimating how far these wolves would go to protect their corruption." His expression was heavy with guilt. "You could have died today because I asked you to testify. That's on me." "No," Esther said firmly. "That's on them. On the wolves who think it's acceptable to kill someone for telling the truth. Don't take responsibility for their evil." Sergio studied her for a long moment. "When I saw that rogue coming for you, when I thought I might not reach you in time." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I've faced death 100 times in battle. I've lost wolves under my command. But in that moment, the idea of losing you was what?" Esther's voice was barely a whisper. "Unbearable." The word was raw, honest. "I barely know you, Esther. We've had maybe 3 real conversations. But there's something about you that—" He shook his head. "I can't explain it. When you gave me that protein bar, when you looked at a stranger with nothing but kindness in your eyes, something in me recognized something in you. Like my wolf was telling me, this one matters. Protect her. Keep her safe." Esther's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "I feel it too," she admitted. "Since the moment you came to my door, there's this pull, this connection I don't understand." Sergio leaned forward, his eyes intense. "In the old stories, they called it recognition. The idea that wolves could sense their true mates, the one soul meant to complement their own. I always thought it was just folklore. Romantic nonsense. But?" Esther prompted. "But then I met you, and every instinct I have is screaming that you're mine to protect. Mine to cherish. Mine." His voice dropped lower. "And I know it's too fast. I know you've been through trauma, and you need time to heal. I know I'm the king, and you're you. But Esther, I need you to know. When I look at you, I don't see an omega, or a victim, or someone who needs saving. I see a warrior. A survivor. Someone extraordinary." Tears spilled down Esther's cheeks. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever made her feel valued, wanted, seen. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything. Not yet." Sergio reached across the space between them and gently wiped her tears away with his thumb. The touch was electric, sending shivers down her spine. "Just know that you're not alone anymore. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, I'm with you. We'll face it together." Before Esther could respond, her stomach growled loudly, breaking the intense moment. Sergio laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made her smile despite everything. "Eat," he said, pushing the tray toward her. "We can talk more later. Right now you need food and rest." He stayed with her while she ate, filling the silence with stories about the capital, about his own training as a young alpha, about the reforms he wanted to implement across all the territories. His voice was soothing, and Esther found herself relaxing despite the day's trauma. When she'd finished eating, Sergio stood to leave. "The guards will be right outside if you need anything, and I'm just down the hall, room 304. If you can't sleep, or if you're scared, come find me. Anytime. Understood?" "Understood," Esther said softly. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "You shifted today, Esther. For the first time properly, your wolf emerged to protect you. Do you know how rare that is? How powerful? I thought omega wolves were weak." "Whoever told you that lied." Sergio's voice was fierce. "Your wolf is strong, beautiful, fierce. Just like you. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." He left, and Esther was alone with her thoughts and the lingering warmth of his words. She changed into the nightclothes someone had provided and climbed into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the rogue lunging at her, felt the terror of near death. Relived the moment her wolf had finally, fully emerged. Her father would be proud, Patrika had said. But would he? Would he be proud that his daughter had killed even in self-defense? Would he understand the choices she was making? "You're protecting the pack," her wolf said softly in her mind. "That's what warriors do. That's what father did." Esther clutched the blanket tighter. Her wolf was right. Her father had died protecting the pack from rogues. She was protecting the pack from a different kind of predator, the ones who wore pack colors while betraying everything packs stood for. She must have eventually slept, because she woke to the sound of screaming. Esther bolted upright, heart racing. The screams were coming from somewhere below, multiple voices, panicked and terrified. Then she smelled it. Smoke. Fire. She ran to the door and yanked it open. The 2 guards stationed outside were already moving, their expressions grim. "Stay in your room," one of them ordered. "We're evacuating the building." An explosion rocked the pack house. The floor bucked beneath Esther's feet, and she was thrown backward into her room. The lights went out, plunging everything into darkness, broken only by the orange glow of flames now visible through her window. "Esther," Sergio's voice roared through the chaos. "Where are you?" "Here," she called back, scrambling to her feet. "I'm here." He appeared in her doorway, backlit by flames, and for a moment he looked like an avenging angel, powerful, furious, magnificent. "Come on. We need to get you out. Now." He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the hallway. Other pack members were fleeing in both directions, some still in pajamas, all of them terrified. The smoke was getting thicker, the heat more intense. "This way," Sergio commanded, leading her toward the emergency stairs. Justin appeared beside them, his face smudged with soot. "East Wing is completely engulfed," Justin reported. "We're evacuating everyone to the training yard. But my king, we've got movement in the forest. Multiple heat signatures. This isn't just a fire, it's a coordinated attack," Sergio finished grimly. "They're using the fire as cover." "How many?" "At least 20, maybe more. 20 rogues. All of them coming for the pack. Coming for her." Sergio's grip on Esther's hand tightened. "Get her to the armored transport. I want her off this territory in the next 5 minutes." "No," Esther said, even as fear clawed at her throat. "I'm not leaving. These wolves, my packmates, they need help. I can fight. I proved that today. Esther, I'm not running." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "If you send me away now, if you treat me like I'm too weak to stand with my pack, then everything I said about not being afraid anymore is a lie." Sergio looked at her like she was insane. "This isn't about bravery. This is about keeping you alive." "Then keep me alive while I help defend my pack," Esther shot back. "I'm not asking permission, Your Majesty. I'm telling you what I'm going to do." For a moment, she thought he might order the guards to physically carry her away. But then something shifted in his expression, frustration, giving way to reluctant admiration. "Fine," he growled. "But you stay with me, you don't leave my side for even a second. And if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Deal. Deal." They burst out of the pack house into chaos. The fire had spread to 2 other buildings, and pack members were forming bucket chains to fight the flames. But in the forest beyond, Esther could see shapes moving, wolves, dozens of them, circling like sharks scenting blood. "Defensive positions," Sergio roared, his alpha command cutting through the panic. "Warriors to the front line. Protect the vulnerable. No one engages until I give the order." Royal Guards and Silvercrest warriors alike scrambled to obey, forming a protective barrier between the pack and the approaching threat. Esther found herself surrounded by armed wolves, all of them ready to fight, ready to protect their own. The rogues emerged from the tree line slowly, deliberately. At their head walked a massive silver wolf, larger than any Esther had ever seen, with scars crisscrossing his body and eyes that burned with fanatical zeal. The wolf shifted, bones cracking and reforming until a naked man stood before them. He was older, maybe 50, heavily muscled and covered in the kind of scars that came from decades of fighting. "Alpha King Sergio," the man called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "I am Oliver Davies, Alpha of the Nightshade Pack. I speak for the old guard, the Alphas who remember what it means to be strong, what it means to lead without weakness." "Oliver Davies," Sergio replied, his voice cold as ice. "I know that name. You were stripped of your Alpha title 10 years ago for killing 3 Omegas who refused your mating proposals. You're a fugitive, a murderer, and a disgrace to wolfkind." "I was a victim of your father's soft policies," Oliver spat. "Omegas refusing an Alpha? Denying the natural order? Your father was weak, and you're weaker still, but we're taking back what's ours. Starting with this pack. This pack is under royal protection. This pack harbors a traitor." Oliver's eyes found Esther, and she felt the hatred in his gaze like a physical blow. That Omega there, she testified against a legitimate Alpha. She broke pack hierarchy. And for that, she dies, along with anyone who protects her. Sergio moved, placing himself directly between Esther and Oliver. "You'll have to go through me first." Oliver smiled, a terrible expression full of malice and anticipation. "Gladly." The rogues attacked. Chapter 6. A bullet meant for a king. The world exploded into violence. 20 rogues surged forward as one, a coordinated assault that spoke of training and discipline far beyond what typical lone wolves possessed. They moved in formation, flankers sweeping wide to cut off escape routes while the main force drove straight toward the pack's defensive line. Sergio shifted mid-stride, his transformation so fluid it seemed effortless. His wolf was magnificent, massive, black as midnight, with eyes that burned gold with Alpha authority. He hit the first wave of attackers like a battering ram, his jaws finding throats and limbs with brutal efficiency. Justin was beside him instantly, his own black wolf tearing into the rogues with savage precision. The royal guards followed, their training evident in every coordinated strike. But the rogues were too good. They fought with the kind of teamwork that came from months of practice. Esther stood frozen for a heartbeat, watching the carnage unfold. Then her wolf surged to the surface, demanding to join the fight. She shifted, the transformation easier this time, more natural. Her white-silver wolf emerged fully formed, strong and ready. A brown rogue broke through the defensive line, racing straight for the pack members huddled near the burning building. Elderly wolves. Children. The vulnerable ones who couldn't fight. Esther didn't think. She just moved. She intercepted the rogue 10 feet from the terrified group, slamming into its side with enough force to knock it off course. The rogue rounded on her, snarling, clearly not expecting resistance from an Omega. It lunged, jaws snapping at her throat, but Esther had been raised by a warrior. Her father's training lessons she'd thought she'd forgotten came flooding back. She twisted, using the rogue's momentum against it, and her teeth found purchase in its shoulder. The rogue howled and tried to shake her off, but Esther held on, her jaw locked with determination. "Protect the pack," her wolf growled in her mind. "Defend what's ours." The rogue managed to throw her off, but by then 2 Silvercrest warriors had arrived to help. Together, they drove the attacker back, forcing it to retreat or face death. Esther spun, searching for the next threat. The courtyard was chaos, wolves fighting in deadly tangles, blood staining the ground, the roar of combat mixing with the crackle of flames. She saw Sergio in the thick of it, a whirlwind of lethal grace, but he was outnumbered. 3 rogues had him surrounded, coordinating their attacks with professional precision. Without hesitation, Esther charged toward him. She hit the nearest rogue from behind, her teeth sinking into its hindquarters. The wolf yelped and turned on her, fury blazing in its eyes. It was bigger than her, stronger, but Esther was faster. She darted in and out, harrying it, distracting it, giving Sergio the opening he needed. The Alpha King didn't waste it. He dispatched one rogue with a devastating bite to the spine, then turned on the second. Within seconds, both were down, and Sergio's golden eyes found Esther's position. "Stay close," his gaze seemed to say. "Don't be reckless." But there was no time for caution. Oliver Davies had entered the fray, his massive silver wolf cutting through the defensive line like a blade. He was heading straight for the pack house, where Patrika and other Omegas had barricaded themselves inside. "No," Esther growled, the sound rumbling from her wolf's chest. She couldn't let him reach them. Couldn't let another Omega suffer at the hands of a monster like Oliver. She sprinted toward the pack house, intercepting Oliver at the steps. It was suicide, she knew that. He was an alpha, experienced and brutal, and she was just an Omega who'd only properly shifted yesterday. But she couldn't let him pass. Oliver's wolf turned on her, and she saw surprise flicker in his eyes. Then amusement, then contempt. He swatted at her like she was an annoying insect. The blow caught Esther in the ribs and sent her tumbling across the ground. Pain exploded through her side, and she tasted blood in her mouth. Oliver advanced slowly, deliberately, clearly intending to finish her off before continuing to his real targets. "Get up," her wolf snarled. "Fight." Esther struggled to her feet, legs shaking, vision swimming. Oliver was almost on top of her now, his jaws opening wide. Sergio crashed into Oliver with the force of a freight train. The two alphas collided in a tangle of fur and teeth and pure dominance. Oliver was bigger, but Sergio was faster, more skilled. They rolled across the courtyard, each trying to gain the advantage, their snarls shaking the air. "Esther." Justin appeared beside her in human form, pulling her away from the fight. "Fall back, you're injured." "I'm fine," Esther lied, even as her ribs screamed in protest. "We have to help him. Oliver is—" "The king can handle Oliver," Justin said firmly. "But we can't handle the rest of them without coordination. I need you to shift back. I need you to help organize the pack members who can fight. Can you do that?" Esther looked at him, saw the trust in his eyes, and nodded. She shifted back to human form, gasping at the pain in her ribs. Someone handed her a robe, and she wrapped it around herself quickly. "Listen to me," she called out to the pack members nearby, a mix of Silvercrest wolves and those who'd been helping fight the fire. "We need to form defensive groups, warriors on the perimeter, support fighters behind them, protect the vulnerable, don't engage unless you have to." To her shock, they listened. Wolves scrambled to obey, organizing themselves with surprising efficiency. Esther found herself at the center of it, directing traffic, calling out threats, coordinating the defense like she'd been born to do it. Father would be proud, she thought, and pushed the pain aside. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The rogues had numbers, but the pack had organization and determination. One by one, the attackers fell or fled. The old guard's assault was crumbling. In the center of the courtyard, Sergio and Oliver's fight reached its conclusion. Sergio had Oliver pinned, his jaws locked around the silver wolf's throat. One bite, one savage twist, and it would be over. Oliver shifted back to human form beneath him, the transformation forced by his submission to a stronger alpha. "Do it," he gasped, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. "Kill me. Make me a martyr. The old guard will rally behind my death. You'll have sparked a war you can't win." Sergio shifted as well, maintaining his grip on Oliver's throat but now with human hands. "I don't need to kill you," he said coldly. "You're going to stand trial. You're going to confess everything, every alpha involved, every crime committed, every wolf you've harmed. And then you're going to spend the rest of your miserable life in a cell, watching as everything you built crumbles to dust." "I'll never—" Sergio's hand tightened, cutting off Oliver's air. "You will, because I'm giving you a choice, cooperate and live, or resist and die. But either way, the old guard ends tonight. Your choice is only whether you want to be remembered as a coward who broke under pressure, or a corpse who died for nothing." Oliver's eyes bulged, his face turning purple. Just when it seemed Sergio might actually kill him, the king released his grip. Oliver gasped for air, coughing and wheezing. "Take him," Sergio ordered the royal guards who'd rushed over. "Maximum security, no contact with anyone. And someone get me a casualty report, now." As the guards dragged Oliver away, Sergio's gaze swept the courtyard and found Esther. Even from across the battlefield, she could see the relief in his eyes. He started toward her, his stride purposeful despite the injuries covering his body. He'd taken 3 steps when Oliver's voice rang out. Now, from the forest, a single gunshot cracked through the night. Silver bullet, aimed directly at Sergio's heart. Time seemed to slow. Esther saw the muzzle flash, saw the trajectory, saw death coming for the king who'd saved her life. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She threw herself forward, arms outstretched, putting herself between Sergio and the bullet. The impact felt like being hit by lightning. White-hot agony exploded through her shoulder, spinning her around. She heard Sergio roar, a sound of pure anguish, felt his arms catch her before she hit the ground. "Esther! Esther!" His voice sounded far away, muffled. She could feel blood warm and wet, soaking through the robe. Her shoulder was on fire, and when she tried to move her arm, nothing happened. Silver bullet. Silver poisoning. Potentially fatal, especially for smaller wolves. "Stay with me," Sergio commanded, his hands pressing against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Don't you dare close your eyes. Medic! I need a medic now." "Got you," Esther managed to whisper, a small smile touching her lips despite the agony. "Saved the king." "You idiot," Sergio choked out, and she realized with shock that he was crying. The Alpha King was crying. "You beautiful, brave, absolutely insane idiot. Why would you do that?" "Because." Esther's vision was starting to fade, darkness creeping in at the edges. "Because you matter. You're going to change everything, save everyone. Can't let them take that away. Esther, please. Stay awake, help is coming, just hold on." But the darkness was so inviting, so peaceful. Esther let her eyes drift closed, feeling Sergio's warmth around her, hearing his voice begging her to stay. "I'm sorry," she thought to her wolf. "We were just starting to be strong." "We are strong," her wolf replied softly. "We saved our mate. That's the strongest thing we could do." Mate. Yes. That felt right. That felt true. Esther let the darkness take her, secure in the knowledge that she'd done something that mattered, that she'd protected someone worth protecting, that she'd finally been strong enough. Hours later, Sergio sat beside Esther's hospital bed, his hand wrapped around her small, pale one. The bullet had been removed 3 agonizing hours of surgery to extract the silver and repair the damage it had caused. The doctors said she'd survive, but the recovery would be long and painful. Silver poisoning didn't heal quickly, even for strong wolves. And Esther was strong, stronger than anyone had given her credit for. "She saved your life," Justin said quietly from the doorway. "Stepped directly into a kill shot without hesitation." "I know." Sergio's voice was raw. He hadn't left her side since they'd brought her in, hadn't allowed himself to rest despite his own injuries. "She shouldn't have done it. She should have let me die," Justin finished. "Because that's what would have happened. Silver bullet to the heart. You'd be dead, and Oliver's assassin would have escaped in the chaos." He paused. "She made a choice, my king. The same choice any wolf would make for their mate." Sergio's head snapped up. "We're not, aren't you?" Justin's expression was knowing. "I saw how you looked at her during that battle, how you fought to protect her, how you lost your mind when she was shot. That's not gratitude, or duty, or even friendship. That's recognition, my king. Your wolf knows it, even if you're not ready to admit it yet." Sergio looked back at Esther's sleeping face. She looked so young, so vulnerable, with bandages covering her shoulder and medical equipment surrounding the bed, but he could still see the fierce warrior who'd fought beside him, the brave woman who'd taken a bullet meant for him without a second thought. "If she's my mate," Sergio said softly, "then she deserves better than a king who put her in danger. Better than someone who let her get shot. She deserves someone who values her enough to let her make her own choices." Justin corrected. "You didn't let her get shot, my king. She chose to save you. Honor that choice by being worthy of it." Before Sergio could respond, Esther stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as she took in her surroundings. When her gaze found Sergio, a small smile touched her lips. "You're alive," she whispered hoarsely. "Thanks to you." Sergio's grip on her hand tightened. "You jumped in front of a bullet, Esther. You could have died, but I didn't." She tried to shift position and winced at the pain. "And neither did you. I'd say, that's a win, a win." Sergio's laugh was slightly hysterical. You call getting shot a win? I call you surviving a win." Her eyes held his, serious despite the pain medication clouding them. "You're important, Sergio. Not just as the king, but as someone who wants to make things better, who fights for wolves who can't fight for themselves. The world needs you alive." "And what about you?" Sergio asked softly. "Doesn't the world need you too?" Esther's smile turned sad. "I'm just an omega, easily replaced." "No." The word came out sharp, fierce. "Don't ever say that again. You're not replaceable. You're not just anything. You're the wolf who gave me her last meal. The warrior who defended her pack. The woman who took a bullet for a king she barely knows. You're extraordinary, Esther. And if I have to spend the rest of my life proving that to you, I will." Tears slipped down Esther's cheeks. "Why? Why do you care so much?" Sergio stood, leaning over her carefully, mindful of her injuries. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb wiping away her tears with infinite gentleness. "Because," he said softly, "from the moment I met you, my wolf has been telling me the same thing over and over. Mine. You're mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to fight for. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But Esther, I think you're my mate, and I'm not letting you go. Not now, not ever." Esther's breath caught. "Mate? If you'll have me." Sergio's expression was vulnerable in a way she'd never seen from him. "I know I'm the king. I know my life is complicated and dangerous. I know I put you at risk, just by being near you. But I won't pretend I don't feel this connection between us. So I'm asking, when you're healed, when you're ready, will you give me a chance? Give us a chance?" Esther stared at him, her heart pounding despite the medication dulling her senses. A mate bond. With the Alpha King, it was impossible, insane, the kind of thing that happened in fairy tales, not to broken omegas living in storage sheds. But when she looked at Sergio, at the hope and fear and desperate sincerity in his eyes, she knew it was real. The connection, the pull, the feeling that she'd found something precious and irreplaceable. "Yes," she whispered. "When I'm healed, when this is over. Yes." Sergio's smile was radiant, transforming his whole face. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture of intimacy and promise among wolves. "Then I'll wait," he murmured. "As long as it takes. You're worth waiting for, Esther. You're worth everything." 2 days later, Oliver Davies had broken. It took less than 24 hours of interrogation before he started naming names, providing evidence, revealing the full scope of the old guard's conspiracy. 17 alphas across the Northern Territory were involved, dozens of beta accomplices, a network of corruption and abuse that stretched back years. And all of it was crumbling now, exposed by Oliver's desperate attempt to save himself from execution. Sergio stood in the temporary command center they'd set up in the Silvercrest pack house, and watched as each name was added to the arrest list. It was going to take months to process all the evidence, conduct all the trials, restructure all the affected packs, but it was happening. Real change was coming. "The capital is going insane," Justin reported, reading messages on his tablet. "News about the old guard is everywhere. Wolves are coming forward with their own stories of abuse. The movement is spreading faster than we anticipated." "Good," Sergio said firmly. "Let it spread. The more wolves who speak up, the harder it will be for this kind of corruption to take root again." "And Miss Bartlett?" Justin asked carefully. "How is she?" Sergio's expression softened immediately. "Stronger every day. The doctors say she'll make a full recovery. Her wolf is healing her faster than they expected. Because she has something to heal for," Justin said with a small smile. "Someone worth getting better for." Sergio didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it. Not when everyone had seen how he'd reacted to her injury. "I'm taking her to the capital as soon as she's cleared to travel. She'll finish her recovery there, under the protection of the royal household. As your acknowledged mate, when she's ready. When she chooses to accept the bond fully. She deserves time to heal, to find herself, to decide what she really wants without pressure." "She wants you," Justin said bluntly. "Anyone with eyes can see that. The question is whether you'll let yourself be happy, or if you'll keep punishing yourself for things that weren't your fault." Before Sergio could respond, one of the medics appeared in the doorway. "Your Majesty, Miss Bartlett is asking for you. She says it's important." Sergio was moving before the medic finished speaking. He found Esther sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had since the shooting. Her color was better, her eyes clearer. The bandages on her shoulder were smaller now, evidence of her wolf's accelerated healing. "You asked for me?" Sergio said, taking his usual chair beside her bed. "I've been thinking," Esther said without preamble. "About what you said, about mates and choices and chances." Sergio's heart rate picked up. And I realized something. For my entire life, I've let other people define me. My mother's Omega blood made me weak. My father's death made me an orphan. Glenn's cruelty made me a victim. The shed made me worthless. She paused, her eyes meeting his with new confidence. "But then you came along. And you saw something different. You saw strength and kindness and worth. You saw me, Sergio. The real me. Because that's who you are," Sergio said softly. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm becoming who I am because you believe I can be." Esther reached out with her good hand and took his. "I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to heal first or figure everything out first or be perfectly ready first. I want to accept the mate bond now. With you. If the offer still stands." Sergio stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Esther, are you sure? You don't have to." "I'm sure." Her voice was steady. "Certain. You make me brave, Sergio. You make me want to be strong. And I think I do the same for you. We make each other better. Isn't that what mates are supposed to do?" Sergio couldn't find words. So instead, he did what his wolf had been demanding since the moment he'd met her. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, mindful of her injuries, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. The gratitude, the respect, the growing love, the promise of partnership and protection and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Is that a yes?" Esther asked breathlessly. "That's a yes," Sergio confirmed. "To mates, to partnership, to everything. You and me, Esther, against whatever comes next." "You and me," Esther agreed. The king and the Omega who showed him what real strength looks like. The king and his queen. Sergio corrected softly. "Because that's what you'll be. Not just my mate, but my equal. My partner in every way that matters." Esther's eyes widened. "Queen, if you want it. If you're ready for it." Sergio's expression was serious now. "It won't be easy. There will be wolves who question your right to the title, who say an Omega can't be queen. But Esther, you've already proven you're stronger than most alphas I know. You've proven you have the heart of a warrior and the soul of a true leader. So yes, Queen. If you'll accept it." For a moment, Esther just stared at him, processing the enormity of what he was offering. Then a smile spread across her face, bright and genuine and full of hope. "Ask me again," she said. "When this is all over. When the trials are done and the packs are rebuilt, and we've had time to really know each other. Ask me then, and I'll give you my answer." "It's going to be yes," Sergio said confidently. "Probably," Esther agreed with a laugh. "But make me wait anyway. Make it special. Make it a moment worth remembering. Deal?" Sergio kissed her again, softer this time. "Now rest. You've got a lot of healing to do before we can start changing the world together." "Together," Esther murmured, settling back into the pillows. "I like the sound of that." As she drifted off to sleep, Sergio sat beside her and marveled at how much had changed in just a few days. He'd come to this pack, expecting to find corruption. Instead, he'd found something infinitely more precious. He'd found his mate, his partner, his future, and he'd make damn sure no one ever threatened her again. Chapter 7. Truth in the Courtroom. 3 weeks later, Esther stood before a mirror in the royal compound and barely recognized herself. The woman staring back at her was healthy, no longer skeletal thin, no longer marked by starvation and neglect. Her white blonde hair had been trimmed and styled, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She wore a simple but elegant dress in deep blue, the color Sergio said brought out her eyes. The bandages were gone from her shoulder, replaced by a thin scar that her wolf was slowly erasing. She looked strong, confident, like someone who mattered. "You're going to be brilliant," Patrika said from behind her, adjusting the collar of Esther's dress. The older woman had come to the capital to support Esther through the trials, refusing to let her face this alone. "Just tell the truth, that's all you need to do." "What if I freeze?" Esther asked, voicing the fear that had kept her awake last night. "What if I get up there and can't speak?" "Then you take a breath, look at the king, and remember why you're doing this." Patrika squeezed her shoulders gently. "You're speaking for every wolf who was silenced, every omega who was abused, every pack member who suffered while corrupt alphas grew rich. Your voice matters, honey, don't ever doubt that." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Miss Bartlett?" Justin's voice called. "The transport is ready. We should leave now to arrive on time." Esther took one last look at herself in the mirror, squared her shoulders, and nodded. "I'm ready." The royal courthouse was a massive stone building in the heart of the capital, designed to intimidate and inspire awe. Esther had visited it once, during the past 3 weeks, for a private tour meant to familiarize her with where she'd be testifying. But that had been empty, quiet. Today, it was packed with wolves from across the territory, reporters, pack representatives, curious citizens, all of them here to witness the trials that would reshape their society. Royal guards escorted Esther through a private entrance, shielding her from the crowds and cameras. They brought her to a secure waiting room where Sergio stood studying documents, his expression intense with concentration. He looked up when she entered, and his whole face transformed. "Esther." He crossed to her immediately, taking both her hands in his. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But ready." "You don't have to do this," Sergio said. "Not for the first time. We have other witnesses, other evidence. If it's too much, it's not too much." Esther met his eyes steadily. "I need to do this. For me. For my father. For every wolf who couldn't speak up." Sergio studied her face, then nodded. "Then I'll be right there. The whole time. If you need a break, just look at me. I'll call for a recess immediately." "Thank you," Esther whispered. "For everything. For believing in me. Always," Sergio said softly, then leaned down to kiss her forehead, a gesture of affection and support that made her heart swell. An hour later, Esther was sworn in and seated in the witness stand. The courtroom was enormous, with high ceilings and dark wood paneling that made everything feel heavy and serious. At the defendant's table sat Glenn Emery, Wendell Blackwell, and Nicholas McCarty, all of them in prison uniforms and restraints. Glenn's face was haggard, aged 10 years and 3 weeks. Wendell looked sullen and angry. Nicholas wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The panel of judges, 5 senior alphas from neutral packs, sat at an elevated bench, their expressions stern, and in the gallery behind them, hundreds of wolves watched in complete silence. Sergio sat in the front row, his presence an anchor in the storm. "Miss Bartlett," the lead prosecutor began, his voice carrying through the room, "thank you for your courage in testifying today. I'd like to start by asking you to describe your living conditions under Alpha Glenn Emery's leadership." Esther took a breath. Then another. Then she began to speak. She told them about the shed, about the cold and the hunger and the complete absence of support. She told them about her father's death, and how quickly the pack's promises had evaporated. She told them about being denied pack resources, about eating scraps, about going days without food while Glenn lived in luxury. Her voice shook at first, but grew stronger as she continued. Because with every word, she felt lighter, unburdened, like she was finally releasing poison she'd carried for too long. "And on the night of December 8th, the prosecutor said, you encountered a stranger at your shed. Can you tell us about that interaction?" "Yes." Esther's eyes found Sergio. "A man came to my door. He looked injured, hungry. He asked for help. For food. And did you know who this man was?" "No. I thought he was a rogue, a traveler passing through." "But you gave him food anyway?" "Yes. He was hungry. I had a protein bar, my last food. So I gave it to him." Esther's voice was steady now. "Because that's what you're supposed to do. When someone needs help, you help them. It doesn't matter who they are or what you get in return. Even though you were starving yourself? Even though... The courtroom was silent. Some of the wolves in the gallery were crying. Even the judges looked moved. And when did you learn the stranger's true identity? The next day, when Alpha King Sergio arrived with the royal guard to arrest Alpha Glenn, Esther smiled slightly. I was surprised. A ripple of soft laughter moved through the courtroom, breaking the tension slightly. Miss Bartlett, the defense attorney, stood now, a slick-looking wolf in an expensive suit who'd been hired to represent Glenn. You claim you were mistreated, but isn't it true that you were provided housing? A storage shed with no heat and holes in the walls is not housing, Esther said calmly. But it was shelter. And isn't it true that pack resources were available to you if you'd simply asked? I asked repeatedly. I was denied repeatedly. By whom? By Beta Wendell Blackwell. By the kitchen staff who followed his orders. By Alpha Glenn himself when I was finally allowed to speak with him. Esther's voice hardened. I begged for help. I was told I was worthless. That I was a stain on my father's memory. That I should leave the pack entirely. The defense attorney's expression flickered. And yet you stayed. If conditions were so terrible, why not simply leave? Because this was my father's pack. My home. The place where I was supposed to be safe and protected. Esther leaned forward slightly. And because I had nowhere else to go. No money. No resources. No other pack would take an Omega with weak blood. Alpha Glenn knew that. He knew I was trapped. He counted on it. Objection, the defense attorney said quickly. The witness is speculating about my client's thoughts. Sustained, the lead judge said. Miss Bartlett, please stick to facts you personally observed. I observed Alpha Glenn living in luxury while I starved, Esther said flatly. I observed Beta Wendell using pack aid money to renovate his personal quarters. I observed Omegas being denied food, medical care, and basic dignity while higher-ranking wolves wanted for nothing. Those are facts. And they're indisputable. The defense attorney tried several more approaches, but Esther stood firm. She didn't let him twist her words or make her doubt her own experiences. When he finally gave up and sat down, she felt a surge of triumph. She'd done it. She'd told her truth. Thank you, Miss Bartlett, the lead judge said kindly. You may step down. The court appreciates your testimony. Esther left the witness stand on shaking legs. As she passed the defendant's table, Glenn looked up at her. Their eyes met. And for just a moment, she saw something in his expression, not remorse exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding, recognition that his choices had consequences. Then the moment passed, and Glenn looked away. Esther returned to her seat beside Sergio, who immediately took her hand and squeezed it. You were perfect, he murmured. Absolutely perfect. I just told the truth, Esther whispered back. That's what made it perfect. That evening, the first day of trials ended with damning testimony from multiple witnesses. Patrika had spoken about the kitchen rationing system that starved Omegas. A former pack accountant had presented evidence of the embezzlement. Even some of Glenn's former supporters had turned on him, providing testimony in exchange for reduced sentences. The case was airtight. Everyone knew it. Esther was back in her quarters at the royal compound, a beautiful suite that still felt surreal after years in a shed, when Sergio knocked on her door. Come in, she called, expecting him to stay for just a few minutes like he usually did. Instead, he entered with a serious expression that made her heart sink. What's wrong? She asked immediately. We intercepted communications, Sergio said without preamble, between some of the old guard members who haven't been arrested yet. They're planning something, Esther. Something big. What kind of something? An attack on the courthouse, tomorrow, during the trials. Sergio's jaw clenched. They want to kill the judges, destroy the evidence, and create enough chaos to derail the entire prosecution. And they want. He stopped, clearly struggling with what he had to say next. They want to kill me. Esther finished quietly. Yes. They see you as the symbol of everything they're fighting against. The Omega who stood up to an Alpha. The witness who's bringing down their entire system. Sergio moved closer, his expression fierce. I'm not letting that happen. I'm pulling you out. You'll be moved to a secure location until this threat is neutralized. No. Esther. No. She repeated firmly. If I run, if I hide, they win. They prove that violence works, that fear is more powerful than justice. And every other witness in those trials will know they're not safe either. Your safety is more important than sending a message, Sergio growled, his alpha authority bleeding into his voice. My safety is important, Esther agreed. But so is this. So are the trials. So is proving that the justice system can't be intimidated. She stood and faced him squarely. You told me once that I was extraordinary, that I had the heart of a warrior. Did you mean it? Of course I meant it. Then trust me to be a warrior now. Let me face this threat with the same courage I faced the last one. Esther reached up and cupped his face with both hands. I'm not the same broken Omega who lived in that shed anymore. I'm stronger now, braver. And I'm not running. Sergio closed his eyes, clearly torn between his need to protect her and his respect for her autonomy. If anything happens to you, it won't, because you'll be there, your guards will be there. We'll be prepared this time, Esther smiled softly. Besides, don't you have faith in your own security measures? My security measures didn't stop you from getting shot, Sergio said roughly, opening his eyes. The pain in them made Esther's heart ache. That wasn't a failure of security. That was me making a choice. She pulled him down until their foreheads touched. And I'd make the same choice again. Every time. Because you're worth protecting, Sergio. Just like this cause is worth fighting for. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing together, drawing strength from each other. Finally, Sergio sighed. Fine, you can stay. But the security is going to be suffocating. Triple guards, advanced sweeps, the works. And if at any point I tell you to evacuate, you evacuate. No arguments. Deal? Deal, Esther agreed. And Esther? Sergio pulled back slightly, his eyes intense. When this is over, when the trials are done and the threats are neutralized and we can finally breathe, I'm asking you that question. The one about being queen, about standing beside me as my equal and my partner. I'll be ready. Esther whispered. I promise. He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of everything words couldn't express. The love that was growing between them. The respect and admiration. The absolute certainty that they were meant to be together. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. Get some rest, Sergio said, his voice rough. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. You too, Esther replied. And Sergio, thank you, for believing I'm strong enough for this. Always, he said softly. I'll always believe in you. The next morning, the courthouse was locked down like a fortress. Royal guards were everywhere on the roof, at every entrance, patrolling the halls in coordinated teams. Metal detectors had been installed overnight. Every wolf entering the building was thoroughly searched. The security was indeed suffocating, but Esther felt grateful for it. She took her seat in the gallery beside Patricia, with Justin and 4 other guards positioned around them. Sergio was at the prosecutor's table, having taken a personal role in the trial to show the Crown's commitment to justice. The morning proceeded with more testimony, financial experts detailing the embezzlement, PAC members describing the abuse. Glenn's defense was crumbling with each witness. By lunch recess, even the defense attorneys looked defeated. That's when the attack came. The first explosion rocked the courthouse's east wing. A controlled detonation that took out a section of wall and sent debris flying. Alarms shrieked. Guards shouted orders. The courtroom erupted into chaos as wolves scrambled for exits. Esther, with me. Justin grabbed her arm, already pulling her toward the emergency exit. Patricia was right behind them, moving surprisingly fast for her age. But before they could reach the door, the windows shattered. Wolves in black tactical gear rappelled into the courtroom, at least 10 of them, all armed with silver weapons, professional mercenaries, judging by their equipment and coordination. Secure the Omega, one of them shouted, pointing directly at Esther. Justin shifted instantly, his massive black wolf placing himself between Esther and the attackers. Other royal guards did the same, forming a defensive barrier, but the mercenaries had come prepared, silver nets, launched from their weapons, designed to subdue and capture wolves without killing them. One of the nets caught Justin, bringing him down in a tangle of silver-coated rope. He howled in pain and fury, struggling to break free. Esther saw Sergio across the courtroom, fighting 3 mercenaries at once. He'd shifted, his black wolf, a blur of lethal grace. But there were too many attackers. They were trying to separate him from her, to divide and conquer. She couldn't let that happen. Esther shifted, her white silver wolf emerging strong and ready. She was faster now, more confident in her transformation. Her wolf felt like an extension of herself rather than a separate entity, a true partnership. A mercenary lunged at her with a silver blade. Esther dodged, her smaller size and speed giving her an advantage. She went low, her jaws finding the mercenary's leg. He screamed and dropped his weapon. Before he could recover, Esther released him and moved to the next threat. She fought with a clarity she'd never experienced before. Every lesson her father had taught her as a child came flooding back, not just the fighting techniques, but the warrior mindset. Protect what matters. Fight smart, not just hard. Never give up. Patrika was huddled behind an overturned table, using it as cover. Esther positioned herself in front of the older woman, snarling a warning at any mercenary who got too close. This was her pack now, not just the Silvercrest wolves, but everyone who'd shown her kindness, everyone who'd believed in her, and she would protect them. More royal guards poured into the courtroom, responding to the attack. The tide began to turn. Mercenaries fell or retreated under the coordinated assault. Within minutes, it was clear they'd failed their mission to capture Esther and destroy the trials had been thwarted. The last mercenary standing threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. "We yield," he shouted. "Don't kill us, we'll talk." Justin, now freed from the silver net, shifted back to human form and immediately moved to restrain the prisoners. Blood streamed from wounds on his arms and chest, but he ignored the injuries. "Esther, are you hurt?" Esther shifted back, checking herself quickly. Scratches, bruises, but nothing serious. "I'm okay." "Patrika?" "I'm fine, honey," Patrika said shakily, emerging from behind the table. "You were magnificent. Your father would be so proud." Across the courtroom, Sergio shifted back and immediately searched for Esther. When his eyes found her alive, standing, unharmed, the relief on his face was palpable. He started toward her, but was intercepted by the lead judge. "Your Majesty, we need to evacuate." "Secure the prisoners first," Sergio ordered, his voice hard as steel. "I want to know who hired them and who else is involved. This ends now." It took another hour to sweep the building and confirm there were no other threats. The explosion had caused structural damage, but no casualties. It had been designed to create chaos, not kill. A distraction rather than the main assault. By the time Esther was finally alone with Sergio in a secure conference room, exhaustion was hitting her hard. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and overwhelmed. "Come here," Sergio said softly, opening his arms. Esther walked into his embrace and let herself break down. She cried against his chest while he held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances. "You were incredible," he said, when her tears finally subsided. "The way you fought, the way you protected Patrika. Esther, you were a warrior today. A true warrior." "I was so scared," Esther admitted, "but I couldn't let them hurt anyone, couldn't let them win." "They didn't win, they failed spectacularly, thanks in large part to you." Sergio pulled back slightly so he could look at her face. "And now they're in custody, and they're going to tell us everything. Every name, every connection, every alpha still working with the old guard. This is the beginning of the end for them." "Good," Esther said fiercely. "They need to be stopped." "They will be." Sergio's expression was intense. "I promise you, Esther, we're going to dismantle their entire network. No more corrupt alphas, no more abused omegas, no more wolves suffering while their leaders profit. That's my vow to you." "Our vow," Esther corrected. "Because I'm going to help you do it. As your partner. Your equal." Sergio smiled, that beautiful, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Yes. As my partner. My equal. My mate." Esther finished softly. "Say it. I want to hear you say it." "My mate," Sergio said, his voice full of reverence and love. "My mate, my queen, my everything. If you'll still have me." "Always," Esther whispered. I'll always have you." They kissed, soft and tender and full of promise. Outside the conference room, the trials would continue. The old guard would be dismantled. Justice would be served. But in this moment, all that mattered was this two souls who'd found each other against impossible odds. Two wolves who'd chosen to stand together against the darkness. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would tear them apart. Chapter 8. Facing the Monster. The interrogations of the captured mercenaries revealed something that shook the entire Northern Territory to its core. The old guard wasn't just a loose coalition of corrupt alphas. It was a structured organization with a leader, someone who'd been coordinating everything from the shadows. Someone with enough power and influence to hire professional killers, to orchestrate attacks on the royal courthouse, to threaten the very foundation of wolf society. And that someone was Ernesto Klein, former alpha of the prestigious Ironwood Pack, and current member of the Northern Territory Council, the advisory body that reported directly to the king. "He's been working against you from within your own government," Justin said grimly, laying out evidence on the conference table. They were in a secure room deep within the royal compound, surrounded by guards and magical wards designed to prevent eavesdropping. For at least 5 years, maybe longer, every reform you've tried to implement, every investigation you've launched, he's been sabotaging them from the inside. Sergio's expression was carved from ice. "How many others on the council are involved? We're still determining that." But Klein was definitely the ringleader. The mercenaries confirmed it. They were hired through intermediaries, but Klein's name came up repeatedly in their communications. Justin pulled up a photo on his tablet. "He's also Glenn's uncle." This was personal for him. "When you arrested Glenn, you threatened his family legacy and his entire operation." Esther studied the photo. Ernesto Klein was in his 60s, distinguished-looking with silver hair and expensive clothes. He had the kind of face that inspired trust, warm eyes, a gentle smile, the perfect mask for a monster. "Where is he now?" Sergio asked. "That's the problem. He disappeared the moment the courthouse attack failed. We've got alerts at every border, every airport, every major transit hub, but..." Justin's expression was troubled. "He had 3 days head start, my king. He could be anywhere. Find him." Sergio's voice was absolute command. "I don't care what it takes. I want every resource we have dedicated to tracking him down. He doesn't get to escape justice." "There's something else," Justin said carefully. "The mercenaries mentioned a failsafe. Klein supposedly has evidence, documents, recordings, proof of crimes committed by other high-ranking wolves. If he goes down, he plans to take a lot of powerful people with him. He's using it as leverage. Let him." Sergio's expression was fierce. "If other wolves are guilty of crimes, they should face justice too. I don't care how powerful they are." Esther listened to all of this with a growing sense of unease. Klein had been on the council for years, had sat in meetings with Sergio, had helped shape policy, and all that time, he'd been working to undermine everything the king stood for. How many other traitors were hiding in plain sight? "What about the trials?" she asked quietly. "Glenn and the others, are they going to be used as bargaining chips?" "No," Sergio said firmly. "The trials continue. We're not negotiating with Klein or anyone else. Justice will be served, regardless of threats or leverage. But if he has evidence that could damage other wolves..." Esther started. "Then those wolves should have made better choices." Sergio's gaze was intense. "I won't sacrifice justice to protect corrupt officials. If Klein wants to burn down the whole system, let him. We'll rebuild it stronger." 4 days later, the trials concluded with guilty verdicts across the board. Glenn Emery, Wendell Blackwell, and Nicholas McCarty were all sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security facility, with no possibility of early release. Their assets were seized and redistributed to the wolves they'd harmed. The Silvercrest Pack would be rebuilt under new leadership, a younger alpha named Zach Lord, who'd been one of the first to surrender during the Eastern Border confrontation. It was justice. Real, meaningful justice. But the victory felt incomplete with Klein still at large. Esther stood in her quarters, preparing for the evening's celebration, a formal dinner to mark the end of the trials and the beginning of pack reconstruction efforts. She'd been measured for a gown, something elegant in deep emerald that made her feel like someone from a fairy tale. She was adjusting the necklace. Sergio had given her a simple silver pendant with a wolf emblem when a knock came at the door. "It's Patrika, honey. Can I come in?" "Of course." Patrika entered, looking lovely in a burgundy dress that suited her coloring, but her expression was troubled. "What's wrong?" Esther asked immediately. "I just heard from one of the kitchen staff. There's a rumor going around that Klein sent a message, to you specifically." Patrika's voice was worried. "He wants to meet. Says he has information about your father that you deserve to know." Esther's blood ran cold. "My father? It's probably a trap, honey. A way to lure you out so he can—" Patrika couldn't finish the sentence. "Kill me," Esther finished quietly. "Or capture me. Use me as a bargaining chip against Sergio." "Exactly. You need to tell the king immediately." Esther nodded, her mind racing. Klein had information about her father. What could he possibly know about Robert Bartlett that she didn't? Her father had been a warrior, honorable and brave. There were no secrets, no hidden scandals. Unless— "Patrika, what if it's true?" Esther asked slowly. "What if Klein really does know something about my father's death? Something I deserve to hear? Then he can tell you through official channels, with guards present and the king's protection surrounding you." Patrika gripped Esther's shoulders. "Don't even think about going to meet him alone. That's what he wants. That's how he wins." "You're right," Esther agreed. "I'll tell Sergio immediately." But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her. What if Klein had evidence that her father's death wasn't what it seemed? What if there was more to the story, something the pack had hidden from her? She needed to know. Even if it was dangerous. Especially if it was dangerous. That evening, the formal dinner was held in the royal compound's grand hall, a massive room with vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers that cast everything in warm, golden light. Wolves from across the territory were in attendance, celebrating the victory over corruption and the promise of real reform. Esther sat at the head table beside Sergio, acutely aware of the eyes on her. Everyone knew she was the king's acknowledged mate now. Everyone was watching to see if an Omega could really stand beside the most powerful alpha in the territory. She was determined to prove she could. "You look beautiful," Sergio murmured in her ear, his hand finding hers under the table, and slightly distracted. "What's wrong?" Esther hesitated, then decided honesty was better than secrets. She told him about Klein's message, about the supposed information regarding her father. Sergio's expression darkened immediately. "It's a trap. Obviously. I know. But what if it's not? What if he really does know something? Then he can tell us through proper channels." "Esther, you're not seriously considering—" "No," she said quickly. "I'm not going to meet him, I promise. She paused, struggling to put her feelings into words. "I just want to know the truth about my father. Whatever it is." Sergio studied her face, then nodded slowly. "I'll have my investigators look into it. If there's anything unusual about your father's death, we'll find it. But safely, through official means. Agreed?" "Agreed," Esther said, relieved. This was better, smarter. The dinner proceeded with speeches and toasts. Wolves stood to praise the king's courage in taking on corruption. Others spoke about the trials, about justice finally being served. When it was Esther's turn to speak, a surprise Sergio had arranged, she stood on shaking legs and looked out at the assembled crowd. "I'm not good at speeches," she began honestly. "A month ago, I was living in a storage shed, wondering if I'd survive another week. The idea that I'd be standing here tonight, in this hall, beside the king himself, I couldn't have imagined it in my wildest dreams." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But here's what I've learned. Strength isn't about rank or power. It's about character. It's about choosing kindness when the world gives you every reason to be cruel. It's about standing up for what's right, even when you're terrified. My father taught me that, and even though he's gone, his lessons live on." Her voice grew stronger. "Every wolf in this room has the power to change things, to stand up against injustice, to protect the vulnerable. You don't need to be an alpha or a warrior or anyone special. You just need to care. And if we all care, if we all commit to making our packs better, kinder, more just, than what happened to me will never happen to anyone else again." The room erupted in applause. Wolves were on their feet, some openly crying. Esther sat down quickly, overwhelmed by the response. Sergio leaned over and kissed her cheek, "You're a natural leader," he whispered, "whether you believe it or not." The dinner continued late into the night. By the time Esther returned to her quarters, she was exhausted but happy. Real change was coming. She could feel it. She was preparing for bed when she noticed something on her nightstand that hadn't been there before. An envelope. Plain white, with her name written in elegant script. Esther's heart began to pound. She picked it up with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message. "Your father didn't die fighting rogues. He died because he discovered what Glenn and I were doing. He was going to expose us, so we made sure he couldn't. The heroic death was a lie. If you want the truth, the real truth about how Robert Bartlett died, come to the old warehouse on 5th Street at midnight. Come alone, or you'll never know what really happened that night. Ernesto Klein." The paper slipped from Esther's fingers. Her father hadn't died a hero's death. He'd been murdered, assassinated to cover up corruption. Everything she'd believed about his sacrifice was a lie. Rage and grief crashed over her in equal measure. She wanted to scream, to break something, to shift and tear Klein apart with her bare teeth. How dare he? How dare he take her father from her and then make it look like a noble sacrifice? She reached for her phone to call Sergio, to tell him about the letter, to let the Royal Guard handle this, but her hand stopped halfway. If she told Sergio, he'd lock down the entire compound. He'd send guards to the warehouse, and Klein would disappear again. The man who'd killed her father would escape justice, and she'd never know the full truth. Esther looked at the clock. 11:15 p.m. She had 45 minutes to decide. She thought about her father, about the warrior who'd taught her to be brave, to stand up for what was right, about the man who'd apparently died trying to expose corruption, trying to protect his pack from the very wolves who should have been leading it. He'd been brave. He'd faced danger alone to do what was right. Could she do any less? "This is stupid," the rational part of her brain said. "This is exactly what Klein wants. You'll be walking into a trap. But if I don't go," another part countered, "I'll never know the truth. And Klein will keep using my father's death as leverage, as bait, until someone else gets hurt." Esther made her decision. She changed into dark clothes, jeans, a black shirt, boots suitable for running or fighting. She left her phone behind, it could be tracked. She took only a small knife from the kitchen, sliding it into her boot. Then she slipped out of her quarters through the bathroom window, using techniques she'd learned as a child to move silently through the shadows. The royal compound had guards, but they were focused on external threats. They weren't expecting someone to sneak out from inside. Esther made it to the perimeter wall and climbed over, dropping into the alley beyond. The warehouse on 5th Street was in the industrial district, a rundown area full of abandoned buildings and broken streetlights. Esther approached cautiously, every sense on high alert. Her wolf was agitated, sensing danger, but Esther pushed forward. The warehouse door was ajar, inviting her in. Last chance to turn back, she told herself. Last chance to be smart. But she thought of her father's face, of his last words to her before he'd left for that final patrol. "Be brave, little wolf. Always be brave." Esther stepped inside. The warehouse was vast and mostly empty, lit by a few flickering overhead lights. Crates were stacked along the walls, creating shadows and hiding places. In the center of the space stood Ernesto Klein, looking nothing like his distinguished council photos. His suit was rumpled, his face haggard, his eyes burning with desperation and rage. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I didn't think you would. Thought the king would have you two locked down. Tell me about my father," Esther demanded, her voice steady despite her fear. "Tell me the truth." "The truth?" Klein laughed bitterly. "The truth is that Robert Bartlett was too honorable for his own good. He found financial discrepancies in Glenn's pack accounts, started asking questions, eventually figured out that Glenn was embezzling, and that I was helping him cover it up." Klein began to pace, his movements agitated. "We tried to buy his silence. Offered him money, status, anything he wanted. But your father was a true believer in the sacred laws. He said he was going to report us to the king's guard. Said it was his duty. So you killed him," Esther said, her voice breaking. "We had him ambushed during a routine patrol. Made it look like rogues. It was clean, efficient. No one suspected anything." Klein's expression was cold. And then we threw his pathetic Omega daughter into a shed and forgot about her, thought the problem was solved. But I didn't forget, Esther said quietly. I survived. And I testified against Glenn. And now your entire organization is falling apart. Because of you. Klein's rage exploded to the surface. One worthless Omega, and everything I built for 20 years is destroyed. Do you know how many alphas I've helped? How many packs I've made prosperous? By stealing from the vulnerable, Esther shot back. By letting Omegas starve while you got rich. That's not prosperity, that's parasitism. Klein's eyes flashed. You think you're so righteous, so pure, but you're just like the rest of them, weak, useless, a drain on pack resources. Your father died because he was weak. And you'll die for the same reason. He shifted, his transformation violent and uncontrolled. His wolf was massive, larger than most alphas, with a gray-brown coat and yellow eyes full of madness. Esther shifted in response, her white-silver wolf emerging. She was smaller, younger, less experienced. But she'd learned something over the past month. Size wasn't everything. Sometimes, the underdog won. Klein lunged, and the fight was on. Esther dodged his first attack, using her smaller size to her advantage. She darted around crates, using the environment to limit his movements. When he chased her, she led him into narrow spaces where his larger body became a liability. But Klein was experienced. He'd been fighting for decades, and his rage gave him terrifying strength. He caught her once, his jaws closing on her hind leg. Pain exploded through Esther's body, and she yelped. No, her wolf snarled. We're not dying here. Not like father. We're winning. Esther twisted in Klein's grip and managed to sink her teeth into his ear. He released her with a howl of pain, and she scrambled away, limping but still mobile. They circled each other, both bleeding, both exhausted. Klein's muzzle was pulled back in a snarl. You can't win, he growled, one of the few wolves capable of speech in wolf form. Even if you kill me, there are others. The old guard will never truly die. Maybe not. Esther agreed, her own voice rough in wolf form. But you will. She lunged, not at Klein himself, but at the crates behind him. Her body slammed into them with all her strength, and they toppled forward. Heavy wooden boxes crashed down on Klein, pinning him beneath their weight. He struggled, trying to shift back to human form to escape, but Esther was already moving. She grabbed the knife from where it had fallen during the fight, somehow still within reach, and shifted back to human form. Klein managed to shift as well, trapped beneath the crates but still dangerous. You won't kill me, he gasped. You're not a killer. You're weak, just like your father. Esther pressed the knife to his throat. My father was the strongest wolf I've ever known. He died protecting the pack from monsters like you, and I. She paused, her hand shaking. She could do it. Could press the blade down, could end him right now. Justice for her father. Vengeance for every wolf Klein had harmed. But that's not who she was. I'm not weak, Esther said quietly. I'm strong enough to let justice be done properly. Strong enough to trust the system my mate is building. She pulled the knife away and shifted back to her wolf, using her body weight to keep Klein pinned until help arrived, which came sooner than expected. The warehouse doors burst open, and Sergio stormed in at the head of a dozen royal guards. His eyes swept the scene. Esther in wolf form. Klein trapped beneath the crates, blood everywhere, and his expression went from terrified to relieved to absolutely furious. Esther, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. What did you do? She shifted back, suddenly aware that she was naked and bleeding and had just disobeyed direct orders to stay safe. I can explain. You left the compound. You came to meet Klein. Alone. Sergio's voice was rising now, his alpha authority making the air vibrate. Do you have any idea how reckless that was? How easily you could have died? But I didn't, Esther said, lifting her chin even as tears streamed down her face. I found him. I got him to confess. And I stopped him myself. Because I needed to know I could. I needed to prove I wasn't weak. You're not weak, Sergio roared. You've never been weak. But being strong doesn't mean being stupid, and what you did tonight was. He stopped mid-sentence, his expression crumbling. Then he crossed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You terrified me," he whispered against her hair. "When I realized you were gone. When I figured out where you'd gone. Esther, I thought I'd lost you. I'm sorry." She sobbed into his chest. "I'm so sorry. But Klein killed my father. He murdered him and covered it up. And I needed to face him. I needed to hear him admit it." "I know," Sergio said softly. "Justin found evidence about your father's death this evening. We were going to tell you tomorrow. But you didn't give us the chance." Guards were securing Klein now, dragging him from under the crates and restraining him with silver cuffs. The former council member was barely conscious, his body broken and his spirit shattered. "It's over," Justin said, appearing at Sergio's side with a blanket for Esther. "Klein's in custody, the old guard is finished. And Miss Bartlett." He paused, looking at her with something like awe. "You took down a former alpha in single combat. That's going to be talked about for generations." "I don't care about that," Esther said, wrapping the blanket around herself. "I just want to go home." "Then let's go home," Sergio said, lifting her into his arms despite her protests that she could walk. "But Esther, we're having a very long conversation about you making reckless decisions." "Understood?" "Understood," she agreed, too tired to argue. As they left the warehouse, Esther looked back at Klein one last time. The man who'd killed her father. The monster who'd terrorized so many wolves. He was defeated now, broken, facing justice at last, and her father could finally rest in peace. Chapter 9. From Shed to Throne. The week following Klein's capture was a blur of medical treatments, interviews, and public statements. Esther's injuries from the fight were more serious than she'd initially realized. Deep lacerations, strained muscles, and silver poisoning from where Klein's claws had scratched her. The royal physicians kept her in the medical wing for 3 days, pumping her full of medicines that counteracted the silver's effects while her wolf worked overtime to heal the physical damage. Sergio barely left her side. He'd canceled meetings, postponed policy reviews, and delegated everything he could to Justin just so he could sit beside her bed and hold her hand. Sometimes he read to her. Sometimes they talked, but mostly, he just stayed close, as if reassuring himself that she was really alive. "You're being overprotective," Esther said on the 3rd day, when she was finally feeling more like herself. "I'm fine now. You don't need to hover." "Yes, I do." Sergio's expression was serious. "Esther, you died for 17 seconds in that warehouse. Your heart stopped. The medics had to revive you." Esther's breath caught. She didn't remember that. Didn't remember anything after Klein's confession except the fight itself. The silver poisoning combined with blood loss and shock. Sergio continued, his voice rough. "You were clinically dead. And I." He paused, struggling with emotion. "I've faced death 100 times in my life, lost wolves I cared about. But nothing has ever terrified me the way those 17 seconds did." "I'm sorry," Esther whispered, squeezing his hand. "I shouldn't have gone alone. I should have trusted you to handle it. I understand why you did it." Sergio lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Your father deserved justice. You deserved answers. And you're strong enough, brave enough to face a monster like Klein alone. I know that now, but Esther," he looked at her with eyes that held both love and fear. "You're also the most important thing in my life, my mate, my partner, my future. And I won't lose you. So I'm asking you, begging you if necessary, no more solo missions, no more rushing into danger without backup. Promise me." "I promise," Esther said immediately. "No more reckless choices. We face things together from now on." "Together," Sergio agreed, relief washing over his face. "I like the sound of that." Klein's confession had opened floodgates across the territory. With the old guard's leader captured and talking, dozens more cases of corruption came to light. Alphas who'd been thought honorable were exposed as embezzlers. Betas who'd seemed loyal were revealed as accomplices. The restructuring that followed was massive pacts being placed under new leadership, financial audits being conducted everywhere, reform policies being implemented at unprecedented speed. And through it all, Robert Bartlett's name was cleared and honored. The truth about his murder spread quickly, and suddenly everyone remembered the warrior who'd died trying to protect his pack from corruption. Memorials were held. His service record was updated to reflect his true cause of death, and Esther found herself inundated with messages from wolves who'd known her father, who wanted to share their memories and express their grief that he'd been lost so young. "He'd be proud of you," Patrika said one afternoon, visiting Esther in her quarters after she'd been released from medical. "Not just for exposing Klein, but for everything. For surviving, for fighting back, for standing up when it would have been easier to stay silent." "I hope so," Esther said softly. "I think about him every day. Wonder what he'd think of all this. The trials, the reforms, me being the king's mate. It's so far from anything he could have imagined for me." "Your father wanted you to be happy and safe," Patrika said firmly. "And you're both now. That's all any parent wants for their child." 2 weeks after the warehouse confrontation, Esther was declared fully healed. Her wolf was strong, her injuries completely gone, and the silver poisoning eliminated from her system. She felt better than she had in years, stronger, more confident, more at peace with herself. And apparently, Sergio had been waiting for this moment. "Get dressed in something nice," he told her one evening, appearing at her door with a mysterious smile. "We're going out." "Out where?" Esther asked, immediately suspicious. "Sergio, if this is some elaborate security drill." "It's not a drill, it's a date." His smile widened. "A real one, just you and me, away from the compound, and the duties, and the constant politics. I want to show you something." An hour later, Esther found herself in the back of an armored SUV, because even on dates, the king traveled with security heading out of the capital toward the mountains. She wore a simple but elegant dress in deep blue, and Sergio had traded his formal attire for jeans and a casual shirt that made him look younger, more approachable. "Where are we going?" Esther asked for the third time. "You'll see," Sergio said, taking her hand. "Just trust me." They drove for almost an hour, climbing higher into the mountains until they reached a private overlook. The view was breathtaking, the entire valley spread out below them, the capital city glittering with lights against the darkening sky. The full moon was rising, huge and golden, casting everything in ethereal light. "This is beautiful," Esther breathed. "This is where I come when I need to remember why I do this job," Sergio said, standing beside her at the railing. "When the politics get overwhelming and the responsibilities feel crushing, I come here and look at all those lights. Each one represents wolves living their lives, working, raising families, loving and laughing and just existing. That's what I'm protecting. That's what matters." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Esther, we've been through more in the past 2 months than most couples experience in a lifetime. We've faced danger, violence, betrayal. We've seen the worst that wolf society has to offer. And through it all, you've been," he paused, seeming to search for words. "You've been extraordinary, brave and compassionate and fierce. Everything I never knew I needed." "Sergio," Esther started, her heart pounding. "Let me finish," he said gently. "I know we talked about this. About me asking you a certain question when the time was right. And I could wait longer, we could have a proper courtship period, do things traditionally, give you more time to be sure. But Esther, I am sure. I've been sure since the night you gave me that protein bar. Since I saw a starving Omega choose kindness over self-preservation." He released her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Esther's breath caught as he dropped to one knee. "Esther Bartlett," Sergio said, his voice strong and clear in the mountain air. "You are my mate, my equal, my perfect match. You make me want to be a better king, a better wolf, a better man. And I know this is fast, I know we're still learning each other, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you, so I'm asking." He opened the box, revealing a ring simple but beautiful, with a single diamond set in silver. "Will you marry me? Will you become my queen? Not just in title but in truth. Will you rule beside me, challenge me, support me, and let me do the same for you?" Tears streamed down Esther's face. A month ago, she'd been living in a shed, believing she was worthless and weak. Now she stood on a mountain with the Alpha King kneeling before her, asking her to be his queen. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder. "Yes. Of course yes." Sergio stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was deep and passionate and full of promise, a kiss that spoke of commitment and partnership and a future built together. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "I love you," Sergio said, the words simple but profound. "I should have said it sooner. Should have told you every day. But I love you, Esther. Completely. Eternally. I love you too," Esther said, her voice choked with happy tears. "I didn't think I'd ever get to say that to someone. Didn't think anyone would ever want me that way. But you see me, Sergio, the real me. And somehow, you love that person. That person is incredible," Sergio said firmly. "And I'm going to spend the rest of our lives proving it to you." They stayed on the mountain for hours, talking and laughing and planning their future. Sergio told her about the coronation ceremony that would follow their wedding, a traditional event where she'd be formally recognized as queen before all the packs in the territory. Esther told him about her dreams for reforms she wanted to implement, programs to help Omegas and support vulnerable pack members. "We're going to change everything," Sergio said, holding her close as they watched the stars emerge. Together, Esther agreed. "I like the sound of that." 6 weeks later, the royal wedding was a relatively small affair, just close friends, trusted advisors, and representatives from the major packs. Esther had insisted on keeping it intimate rather than the massive public spectacle that royal weddings typically were. She wanted the focus to be on the commitment, not the ceremony. She wore a dress of white silk that made her look like moonlight given form. Patrika stood as her witness, crying happy tears throughout the entire ceremony. Justin served as Sergio's best man, his usually stern expression softened with genuine joy for his king. The vows were traditional but heartfelt. When Sergio promised to honor and protect her, Esther felt the weight of those words settle into her soul. When she promised to stand beside him through whatever challenges came, she meant every syllable. And when they were pronounced mates and married before the eyes of the pack, the kiss that followed was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they'd build together. But the wedding was just the beginning. The coronation ceremony was scheduled for the following week, and that would be public. That would be the moment when Esther officially became queen, when she took on the responsibilities and duties that came with the title. The preparation was intense. Esther spent hours with protocol advisors, learning the formal procedures, practicing her speech, studying the history and traditions of the Northern Territory. She met with pack leaders, reviewed policy proposals, and began the work of actually governing alongside Sergio. It was overwhelming, terrifying, even, but also exhilarating. "You're going to be amazing," Sergio told her the night before the coronation, as they lay together in their private quarters. "The best queen this territory has ever seen." "I'm going to try," Esther said, snuggling closer to him. "I want to honor the position, honor you, make a real difference for wolves who are suffering." "You already have," Sergio murmured, kissing her forehead. "Just by surviving, by speaking up, by refusing to stay silent, you've inspired more wolves than you know. The applications to the reform programs have tripled since you became public. Omegas are standing up to abusive alphas, pack members are demanding accountability, all because they saw you do it first." "That's terrifying," Esther admitted. "What if I mess up? What if I'm not strong enough?" "You're the strongest wolf I know," Sergio said firmly. "And you're not alone. You have me, Justin, Patrika, loyal guards, good advisors. We're all here to support you. You don't have to be perfect, Esther. You just have to be you." The coronation ceremony. The throne room of the royal compound was packed with wolves from every corner of the Northern Territory. Alphas and betas stood alongside Omegas. Warriors mixed with merchants, with healers, with teachers. Every rank, every background, all of them gathered to witness history. The first Omega queen in the history of the Northern Territory. Esther stood in the preparation room, staring at herself in the mirror. She wore formal ceremonial robes in silver and blue, the colors of the royal house. A crown of delicate silver waited on a cushion nearby, ready to be placed on her head. She looked like a queen already, but inside, she still felt like that girl in the shed sometimes. Still heard the voices telling her she was worthless, weak, nothing. "Stop it," she told her reflection firmly. "You're not that girl anymore. You're strong, you're worthy, and you're about to become queen." A knock at the door announced Patrica's arrival. "It's time, honey." "Are you ready?" "No," Esther said honestly. "But I'm doing it anyway." Patrica hugged her fiercely. "Your father is watching from wherever warriors go when they die, and he's so proud he could burst. Never forget that." They walked together to the throne room entrance. Through the massive doors, Esther could hear the assembled crowd, hundreds of voices in conversation, the rustling of formal clothes, the anticipation that hummed through the air. The doors opened, and silence fell. Esther stepped into the throne room, and every eye turned to her. She walked down the center aisle alone. This was her moment, her journey, and she had to take it by herself. But at the end of the aisle, Sergio waited on his throne, his expression full of love and pride. "You can do this," her wolf said, stronger and clearer than ever. "We survived starvation and abuse and assassination attempts. We can walk down an aisle." Esther reached the throne platform and climbed the steps. At the top, she turned to face the crowd. The lead priest of the Northern Territory stepped forward, carrying the crown. "Wolves of the Northern Territory," the priest announced, his voice carrying through the vast room. "We gather today to witness the coronation of Esther Bartlett as queen and co-ruler of our lands. She comes to this position not through birthright or political arrangement, but through merit and the recognition of her strength, wisdom, and compassion." He turned to Esther. "Esther Bartlett, do you accept the responsibilities of this position? Do you swear to serve all wolves equally, to uphold the sacred laws, to protect the vulnerable and challenge the corrupt?" "I do," Esther said, her voice steady and strong. "Do you swear to rule with wisdom and mercy, to listen to all voices regardless of rank, and to work tirelessly for the betterment of every pack in this territory?" "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me by the sacred laws and the assembled packs, I crown you." The priest lifted the delicate silver crown and placed it on Esther's head. "Queen Esther Bartlett of the Northern Territory. Long may she reign. Long may she reign." The crowd roared in response, their voices shaking the walls. Sergio stood and took Esther's hand, raising it high. "Your queen," he announced. "My mate, my partner, my equal in all things. Honor her as you honor me. Respect her as you respect the sacred laws themselves, for she has proven herself worthy 1,000 times over." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Esther looked out at all those faces, some skeptical, some supportive, some still deciding what they thought of an Omega Queen. But they were all here, all witnessing this moment, all part of the change that was sweeping through wolf society. In the front row, she saw Patrica openly sobbing with joy. She saw Justin standing at attention but with a small, proud smile. She saw Zach Lord, the new alpha of the Silvercrest pack, giving her a respectful nod. She saw faces she didn't know, wolves from distant packs who'd traveled to witness this unprecedented event. And she saw, in the shadows at the back, a group of Omegas standing together, young wolves who looked at her with hope in their eyes, with the belief that maybe, just maybe, they could be more than society told them they could be. For them, Esther straightened her spine and lifted her chin. For them, she became the queen they needed her to be. "Thank you," she said, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the throne room. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing this moment. And thank you for being willing to embrace change, even when it's uncomfortable." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I know some of you doubt that an Omega can be queen. I understand that skepticism. I doubted myself for most of my life. But here's what I've learned. Strength comes in many forms. It's not just about physical power or domination. It's about resilience, compassion, the courage to stand up when it's easier to stay down. And those qualities exist in every rank, every wolf, regardless of status." Her voice grew stronger. "As your queen, I promise to fight for every wolf who's been overlooked, silenced, or abused. I promise to challenge any system that values rank over character. And I promise to work tirelessly to create a territory where every wolf alpha, beta, or omega can reach their full potential without fear or limitation." The applause was deafening. Even the skeptical faces looked moved. Sergio squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with love and pride. "Well said, my queen." "Thank you, my king," Esther replied, smiling up at him. Together, they turned to face their territory, Two wolves who'd found each other against impossible odds. Two leaders who'd fight side by side to make their world better. Two mates who'd proven that love and justice could triumph over corruption and cruelty. The celebration that followed lasted long into the night, feasting, dancing, speeches from pack leaders pledging their support. Esther met more wolves than she could count, heard more stories than she could process. But through it all, Sergio stayed close, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. Late in the evening, when most of the crowd had departed and only close friends remained, Esther slipped away to a quiet balcony overlooking the capital. The city sparkled below, peaceful and beautiful under the stars. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Sergio joining her, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. "Needed a break from being queen?" he asked with a smile, handing her a glass. "Just taking a moment to appreciate how far I've come," Esther said softly. 2 months ago I was starving in a shed. Now I'm queen of the Northern Territory. It doesn't feel real." "It's real," Sergio assured her. "And you earned every bit of it. Not because you're my mate, but because you're extraordinary." "We're extraordinary together," Esther corrected. "I couldn't do any of this without you." "That's what partnership means," Sergio said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Supporting each other, making each other stronger, being better together than we could ever be apart." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city and dreaming of the future they'd build together. A future of justice and compassion. A future where rank didn't determine worth. A future where every wolf could be strong. "I love you," Esther said softly. "I love you too," Sergio replied. "My queen, my mate, my everything." And in that moment, under the stars, with the weight of the crown on her head and the warmth of her mate beside her, Esther Bartlett, former shed dweller, starving Omega, and now queen of the Northern Territory, finally, truly believed she was enough. More than enough. She was extraordinary. Chapter 10, Epilogue. The Omega who became queen. 6 months later, Queen Esther Bartlett stood at the podium in the newly constructed Omega Resource Center and looked out at the faces gathered before her. Young wolves, mostly teenagers and young adults who'd come from packs across the Northern Territory, seeking education, support, and the kind of opportunities that had been denied to Omegas for generations. "When I was your age," Esther began, her voice carrying through the crowded auditorium, "I believed the lies society told me, that Omegas were weak, that we existed only to serve higher-ranking wolves, that our voices didn't matter and our dreams were foolish." She paused, letting the words settle. "I lived in a storage shed. I went days without food. I was told repeatedly that I was worthless, a burden on my pack. And I almost believed it, almost let those lies define me." In the front row, Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Beside her sat Zach Lord, the new Silvercrest Alpha who'd become one of Esther's staunchest allies in the reform movement. Throughout the audience, young Omegas sat forward in their seats, hanging on every word. "But then something changed," Esther continued. "I met someone who saw past my rank to the person underneath, someone who believed I had value not despite being an Omega, but simply because I was me, and that changed everything." She smiled, glancing to the side of the stage where Sergio stood watching with obvious pride. "It changed how I saw myself. It gave me the courage to speak up, to fight back, to demand better. And look what happened." Esther gestured to the building around them, state-of-the-art classrooms, training facilities, counseling centers, all funded by the redistribution of seized assets from corrupt alphas. "This center exists because Omegas deserve education and opportunity. Because rank shouldn't determine your worth or limit your potential. Because every wolf, regardless of status, has something valuable to contribute to pack society." The applause was enthusiastic and genuine. These young wolves had been raised in the old system, had experienced the discrimination and limitations firsthand, but they were also witnessing unprecedented change: Omega representation on pack councils, legal protections against rank-based discrimination, educational programs designed specifically for wolves who'd been historically excluded. And at the center of all of it stood an Omega queen who proved that anything was possible. "I'm not going to tell you it's easy," Esther said when the applause died down. "Changing centuries of tradition never is. There are still alphas who resist reform. Still packs where Omegas face discrimination. Still wolves who believe the old ways were better. But here's what I want you to remember. She leaned forward, her expression intense. You are not defined by your rank. You are defined by your character, your choices, your actions. Some of you will become leaders. Others will be teachers, healers, warriors, artists. Your paths will be different, but they all have value, and anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong. Her voice strengthened. So be brave. Be bold. Demand the respect you deserve, but also earn it through your actions. Show the world that Omegas are strong, capable, and worthy of standing beside any alpha. Because you are. I promise you, you are. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Esther saw tears on many faces, hope in even more. When she finally left the stage, she was immediately surrounded by young wolves, wanting to thank her, to share their stories, to tell her what her example meant to them. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. You're inspiring a generation, Sergio murmured in her ear when he finally managed to extract her from the crowd. These wolves are going to change the world because you showed them they could. We're changing it together, Esther corrected, taking his hand. I'm just the visible symbol. You're the one implementing the policies, enforcing the reforms, making sure the change actually happens. Partnership, Sergio said with a smile. Like we agreed. They left the center through a private exit, climbing into the waiting SUV that would take them back to the royal compound. The security was still heavy. Klein's arrest had broken the old guard. But there were always wolves who resented change. Esther had received 3 death threats in the past month alone. But she refused to live in fear. Refused to hide or minimize herself to make others comfortable. How was the Northern Council meeting this morning? Esther asked as they drove through the capital. Productive, surprisingly, Sergio replied. We finalized the new pack charter, the one that requires Omega representation on all leadership councils. It passed with only 2 dissenting votes. Only 2? Esther raised her eyebrows. That's progress. 3 months ago, half the council would have voted against it, because 3 months ago, they hadn't seen the results of the reforms yet. Now they have data showing that packs with diverse leadership are more stable, more prosperous, and have higher member satisfaction. Sergio's expression was satisfied. Turns out, treating all wolves with dignity is actually good for everyone. Who knew? Esther laughed. Shocking development. They passed through the capital's main square, where a massive statue had been erected 2 months ago. It depicted a wolf smaller than the massive alpha sculptures that dominated most public spaces, standing tall with its head held high. The plaque at the base read, "To the strength found in compassion, to the courage of the overlooked, to every wolf who refuses to be defined by rank." It was officially a memorial to all the Omegas who'd suffered under the old system. Unofficially, everyone knew it was inspired by Esther's story. She'd wept the first time she'd seen it. "Do you ever regret it?" Sergio asked quietly, following her gaze to the statue. "The responsibility, the constant scrutiny, the death threats? You could have chosen a quieter life, accepted a comfortable position away from the spotlight." "Never," Esther said immediately. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's scary sometimes. But I'm making a difference, Sergio. Real, measurable difference in wolves' lives. How could I regret that?" "You couldn't," Sergio agreed. "Because you're the best person I've ever known." Back at the royal compound, they were immediately pulled into the afternoon schedule meetings with foreign dignitaries, policy reviews, a video conference with pack leaders from the southern territories who were considering implementing similar reforms. The work never stopped, but Esther had learned to thrive in it. She was reviewing education statistics when Justin appeared in her office doorway. "Your Majesty, there's someone here asking to see you, says it's personal." Esther looked up, curious. "Who?" "Benny Burton. Used to be part of Glenn Emery's inner circle. He served 6 months for complicity in the embezzlement scheme, and was released last week." Esther's first instinct was to refuse. Benny had been one of the wolves who'd turned a blind eye to her suffering, who'd benefited from the corruption that had nearly destroyed her. "But, send him in," she said. "But stay close, just in case." Justin nodded and returned moments later with Benny. The man looked nothing like the arrogant beta Esther remembered. He was thinner, older looking, with eyes that reflected genuine remorse. "Your Majesty," Benny said, dropping to one knee in the traditional gesture of submission. "Thank you for seeing me. I know I don't deserve." "Stand up," Esther said gently. "We don't do that here. Just talk to me. What do you need?" Benny stood slowly, looking uncomfortable. "I came to apologize. For everything. For what I did or didn't do. For watching you suffer and doing nothing. For benefiting from a system that treated you like garbage while pretending I was a good wolf." He took a shaky breath. "I spent 6 months in that cell thinking about my choices, about the wolf I'd become. And I realized I was a coward, worse than the ones actively causing harm because I knew it was wrong and did nothing." "Why are you telling me this?" Esther asked quietly. "Because you deserve to hear it. Because I need to say it out loud." Benny's voice cracked. "And because I want to do better. I want to be part of the solution, instead of part of the problem. If you'll let me. If you can find it in yourself to give me a chance I absolutely don't deserve." Esther studied him for a long moment. She could see the sincerity in his expression, the genuine remorse. She also knew that holding on to anger and resentment would only poison her own soul. "I forgive you," she said finally. "Not because you've earned it, but because I refuse to let bitterness control my life. And Benny, if you truly want to do better, there's a program at the new resource center. Former offenders working with at-risk youth, using their experiences to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Talk to Zach Lord. He'll get you connected." Benny's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I won't waste this chance, Your Majesty. I promise." After he left, Justin gave Esther an approving nod. "That was remarkably generous. That was strategic," Esther corrected with a slight smile. "If we want lasting change, we need to give wolves a path to redemption. Otherwise, they'll just become bitter and resistant. But if they can become part of the solution..." She shrugged. "Everyone benefits. And that," Justin said, "is why you're an excellent queen." That evening, Esther and Sergio had dinner in their private quarters, a rare, quiet evening with no formal events or obligations. Just the two of them, some good food, and the comfortable intimacy of mates who'd been through hell together and come out stronger. "I got a call from Oliver Davies today," Sergio said, twirling pasta on his fork. "From prison." Esther looked up, surprised. "What did he want?" "To apologize, apparently. Said the past 6 months of isolation have given him time to think. That he understands now why his methods were wrong." Sergio's expression was skeptical. "I'm not sure I believe him. But he also provided information about 3 more alphas we hadn't identified as part of the old guard network. So even monsters can do some good in the end," Esther mused. "Or they're trying to reduce their sentences," Sergio countered. "Either way, the information is valuable." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Sergio set down his fork and looked at her with an expression Esther had learned to recognize, serious but excited. "What?" she asked. "I want to talk about the future. Our future specifically." Esther's heart skipped. "Okay, we've been married for 6 months. We're both healthy, the territory is stable, and the reforms are progressing better than expected." Sergio reached across the table and took her hand. "I think it's time we talked about having pups." Esther's breath caught. They'd discussed this theoretically, but hearing him say it out loud made it suddenly very real. "You want to have children? Now? If you're ready. If you want them." Sergio's expression was vulnerable. "I know your childhood was difficult. I know you might have complicated feelings about bringing pups into this world. But Esther, I can't imagine anything more perfect than building a family with you. Teaching our children to be strong and kind. Showing them that rank doesn't define worth." Esther felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "What if I'm not a good mother? What if I pass on all my insecurities and trauma? Then we'll work through it together," Sergio said firmly. "Just like we work through everything. Esther, you're going to be an amazing mother. You're patient, compassionate, strong. Everything a pup could need." "What if they're omegas?" Esther asked quietly. "What if they face the same discrimination I did? Then they'll have a queen for a mother who's literally rewriting society's rules, and a king for a father who'll make sure anyone who harms them regrets it for the rest of their lives." Sergio smiled. But more importantly, they'll grow up in a world you're actively making better. A world where being an Omega isn't a limitation anymore. Esther looked at their joined hands, his large and calloused, hers smaller but no less strong. She thought about the future, about tiny pups with her white blonde hair, or Sergio's dark features, about teaching them to be brave, to stand up for others, to never let anyone define their worth. Okay, she said softly. Let's do it. Let's build a family. Sergio's smile was radiant. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion and tenderness that made her toes curl. I love you, he murmured against her lips. More than I ever thought possible. I love you too, Esther replied. My king, my mate, my partner in everything. 1 year later, Queen Esther stood on the same mountain overlook where Sergio had proposed. But this time she wasn't alone. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, was her 3-month-old son Abel, named after no one in particular, simply because she'd liked the name's strength and simplicity. He had her white blonde hair and Sergio's dark eyes, and he was already showing signs of being a strong wolf. His first shift would come in another few months, and Esther couldn't wait to see what kind of wolf he'd become. Your father proposed to me here, she told Abel, who watched her with serious, attentive eyes. Right on this spot. I was terrified and thrilled and so hopeful. And look at us now. She turned so Abel could see the view, the capital city spread out below, glittering with the lights of wolves living their lives in freedom and safety. That's your world, little one. A world where you can be anything you want. Alpha, beta, or omega, it doesn't matter. What matters is who you are inside. Your character. Your choices. Starting the lessons early? Sergio's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him climbing the path, looking windswept and happy. He'd been in meetings all morning but had promised to join her here for lunch. Never too early to learn about being a good wolf, Esther said with a smile, passing Abel to his father. Sergio cradled their son with practiced ease, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead. How were the meetings? Esther asked. Productive. The Southern Territory wants to implement our reform model. They're sending a delegation next month to study how we did it. Sergio's expression was proud. Your story is spreading, Esther. Wolves all across the continent are hearing about the Omega who became queen, about the reforms that actually work, about the possibility of real change. Our story, Esther corrected. And it's not just me. It's every Omega who's spoken up, every Alpha who's supported reform, every wolf who's chosen kindness over cruelty. We're all part of this. That's what makes it beautiful, Sergio agreed. It's not one hero. It's a movement. A genuine shift in how wolves see themselves and each other. They sat together on a blanket Sergio had brought, sharing lunch and watching the world they'd helped reshape. Abel fell asleep in Sergio's arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. Do you ever think about that night? Esther asked softly. When you came to my shed? Every day, Sergio replied. I think about how close I came to never meeting you. If I'd gone to a different pack that night, if I'd chosen a different shed, if you'd refused to help, everything would be different. But you did come to my door. And I did help you. And here we are. Here we are, Sergio echoed, pulling her close with his free arm. Building a better world for our son. For all the pups who'll come after him. Making sure no wolf ever has to choose between kindness and survival like you did. Esther leaned into his warmth, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. She thought about how far she'd come from that broken Omega in a storage shed to Queen of the Northern Territory. From starving and alone to loved and surrounded by family and purpose. It hadn't been easy. There were still challenges ahead. Still wolves who resisted change. Still systems that needed reforming. But for the first time in her life, Esther felt truly at peace. She'd found her strength, her voice, her purpose, and she'd found love, the kind of deep, abiding partnership that made everything else possible. Thank you, she whispered to Sergio. For what? For seeing me. For believing in me. For giving me the chance to become who I was always meant to be. Sergio kissed the top of her head. Thank you for being brave enough to give a beggar your last meal. For showing me what real strength looks like. For choosing to stand beside me even when it was dangerous. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Below them, the capital city continued its evening routines, wolves returning home from work, families gathering for dinner, pups playing in parks that were now safe and welcoming for all ranks. A world transformed, a society reborn. All because one Omega had chosen kindness when she had every reason to choose bitterness. All because one king had seen past rank to the person underneath. All because two wolves had found each other and decided to fight for something better. As the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Queen Esther Bartlett, former shed dweller, survivor, warrior, mother, and living symbol of hope for Omegas everywhere, smiled. She'd come home to herself at last, and it was glorious. Dear viewers, as we reach the end of Esther's journey, I want to ask you something. If you had been in that shed on that freezing night, starving and forgotten, would you have given your last meal to a stranger? Would you have chosen kindness when the world had shown you only cruelty? Esther's story reminds us that our greatest strength isn't found in power or rank, it's found in the choices we make when no one is watching. In the compassion we show when we have every reason to be bitter. In the courage to stand up even when we feel small. Drop a comment below. What moment in Esther's story resonated with you most? Was it her first act of kindness? Her transformation in battle? Or her coronation as queen? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that anyone can rise above their circumstances, please hit that like button. It helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing Esther's journey from shed to throne. Until the next story, has to stay strong, stay kind, and remember, you are never as powerless as the world wants you to believe.